We need to move away as a society from this. You can be anything you want to be. To the more accurate, you can be a hell of a lot more of who you already are. My job is to put people under the conditions that enable them to win their race so that they can be that everything they could potentially be. So that's the athlete, the entrepreneur, the military operator, the mindset that we see to deliver that performance on demand under pressure. Why do some people excel at the absolute upper limit of human potential and why do others not? And are these factors controllable? How do we take this guy that's the probability of success or him becoming a world champion so low? How do we stack every possible fucking edge we can find in his favor?
You can be anything you want to a certain level. You're talking about excellence here. You're talking about the 1%, the 5%, the top. Anyone can't be all of them.
When anyone anywhere gets better at whatever they do, they make the world a bit better. We can't wait for politicians to fix the world's problems. It's our job, you know, and I think the better we all understand how to accelerate our own pursuit of excellence, then, you know, the better we can do that and go out and save the world. Unfortunately, you're going to experience all the emotions under the sun, and that's part of life. And you need to be able to inoculate against them. Schools, elite development programs, we should be creating safe, controlled environments where we force people to confront failure. Is it realistic to expect ourselves, people that we're leading, or society to be able to deal with all the emotion, challenge and failure that life or performance will inevitably bring if they're never exposed to it?
James, welcome.
Ty, thanks for having me here, mate. I've been looking forward to it.
And me. How, you've just been in Australia, haven't you?
I have. I was there it was a quick hit, 1 week. So it's a bit brutal jet lag, but it was so nice, mate, just getting some sun.
Work or pleasure?
Work. It was unfortunately 90-10 work, this one. But just being there, you know what Aussies are like as well. They're so chilled out. It's just a refreshing culture compared to London or the southeast of the UK at least. And
worst places to work, isn't it? I suppose.
100%. 100%.
Mate, before we dive back into the origin story and bring people up to date, if you were going to explain just short in a couple of sentences what it is you do, so anyone listening can kind of get a bit of context before we dive in.
Yeah. Well, look, ultimately, my job is to put people under the conditions that enable them to win their race so that they can be that everything they could potentially be. So I often use the term like to accelerate excellence. So accelerate to increase in rate, amount or extent, and then excellence, that quality of being outstanding.
Nice. So in short, kind of, if you were going to sum it up, like a mindset coach, would you say? A performance coach?
Well, look, mindset's a huge part of it, but it's leveraging multidisciplinary science. So from psychology, physiology, neuroscience, management, leadership, leveraging everything that can possibly link to stacking the probability in the favor of success for that individual. Everything that can be used is used. And the ultimate product, though, as we would look at it traditionally from the outside, at the elite performance, whether that's the athlete, the entrepreneur, the military operator, is going to be the mindset that we see to deliver that performance on demand under pressure.
Something I'm super interested in this topic, so I'm buzzing to get in. But before we start, as with all the guests, origin story, let's take it back to understand who Mr. James A. King is, or James King. So childhood, start at the beginning.
Okay, so I was born in Dundee. Okay. My dad's family all from Edinburgh. Mum's from East London. My dad
mix.
Yeah, it is actually. And my dad was in the military, so I moved around a lot as a kid. But to be fair, probably, you know, I think I'd have to say I've won the lottery in terms of parents. Really lucky in that respect. I guess the ethos example they set for me is that if you work hard and be a good person, good things will tend to happen across time. And
love that.
Yeah, and like I've been really lucky there. Like some of my earlier memories are like, you know, my dad working all day, coming home, he'd look after my sister. Then my mum would go out, do a cleaning job, and I'd sometimes go along with her, and I thought that was really like cool because I was like contributing and part of the team. Do you know what I mean? Then we'd get back, and then dad would go out and drive taxis. So like super hard working in that respect, and that sort of probably it cemented some of those values in me.
And one sister, you said?
Yeah, younger sister.
Younger sister. So overall, the relationship with family and that was pretty solid, yeah?
Yeah.
They're still together?
Really lucky, robust. Yeah, parents still together.
That's fortunate, that as well.
Yeah,
in
yeah.
this day and age.
Yeah, beat the odds there, I guess. But yeah, it doesn't mean it was always probably picture perfect, but yeah, made it work.
And then what were you like kind of at school and stuff? What kind of kid were you when you know what I mean? Like,
I think school for me, like especially at a younger year, because I was moving around quite a bit, it was just sort of going through the motions, mate. School was just something you did. You turn up, you do it, you leave. And you know, even going on to secondary school for me, it was where I grew up. I sort of did my secondary school in sort of West Essex and the sort of town or area I grew up in. You know, there's like 6 secondary schools, but 1 does A levels. Like at my school, it wasn't like, it certainly wasn't cool to be academic. Most people going through the motions. It was, you know, from a hierarchy perspective, it was more about be good at sport, be hard, or be funny.
Yeah.
And but school was positive for me. You know, it was a good school, good experience, great people. I fell in love with sport, so you know, I was one of those guys at lunchtime. Every lunchtime, I'd be out training. Whether I'm running cross country, playing football, rugby, whatever it was, that was like I was active and my mind was active, and that was probably my challenge at school. It was just slow, and I would just lose attention quite quick in an academic perspective. But I didn't also, I lacked that ability to intuit, how's this going to help me? How's this make my boat go faster? That was something from an academic perspective that didn't come till later on for me.
You talk about moving around a lot.
Yeah.
Like how often are we talking, and then how does that affect you? Obviously, I moved around a little bit as a kid as well.
Yeah.
And every time you go to a new school, it's fucking the same thing. You're trying to find your group of mates. You're trying to fit in again. And it can fuck with your head a little bit, that can't it? So what was that like?
I didn't know any different.
Got you.
And I think it makes you closer as a family, because you realize like, what are the things that are permanent in life and what things are transient? And you're like, okay, this is a school, this is an experience. You go there, you make friends. You don't have a choice in that, do you? You just do that. You get on. It's quite a natural thing. And I think my parents probably were good with that as well. They probably painted an exciting picture about it. Like, we're going to go and, like, for instance, when I was young, we lived out in Sardinia for 2-3 years. Yeah. And that was like exciting, moving from Scotland to Sardinia. But then equally moving back, that was also exciting. It's all about it's like most things in life, right? It's the narrative you put around the experience. You can frame anything to be great. You can also frame anything to be shit. Yeah, I think I was just lucky again from a parenting perspective, but also just didn't know any different, mate. So it was just iterate through it.
Dad in the military, I always find this interesting because every kid has a different experience when they've got a parent in the military. Was he strict with you guys at home, you and your sister? Was it like quite regimented?
So I would say it like oscillated between two things. So it was either extremely playful or extremely strict. You know, like if you ask my mates where I grew up, people be like, "Oh, your dad's like strict on it," you know, from an external perspective. But then also, you know, closer friends would be like mega playful and fun in that perspective.
And like growing up, then would you also like kids? If you look at kids and you look at what their parents do, there's a big connection between for the career they end up in, right? So an army's dad's kid sometimes ends up in the army. A solicitor's kid ends up as a solicitor. Yeah. Not all the time, but there's definitely connections in between these. Did that push you towards military, seeing him do that?
I think it was certainly at the forefront in terms of what you do, right? Because like you said, you orientate based on what you've seen around you, right? We're not fully conscious of the world. We're fully conscious, or we're partly conscious of the world based on our unique experience. And I guess my experience growing up, that everyone in my family, in terms of male role models, was either trade work or the military.
Yeah.
And it was something that I think probably made me rather like, okay, you just grow up and you do this stuff. And it wasn't until I had sort of other experiences that sort of lit something in me that enabled me to be like, oh, right, maybe that's an option for me in different areas and domains. But yeah, of course, that influences, what you perceive is a sensible way to proceed from a career perspective.
They're like our youngest role models, aren't they? You know,
yeah.
from the early years. And we were talking about this earlier, like about me, my business, and potentially trying to digitalize it and how we do it. You know, I've always grown up, and I said to you off air, I've always grown up. None of my parents went to university, right? So I've just grown up thinking that you're born, you grow up, you set a business up, and that's what you do. And when I say set a business, it's very analog, like shops, takeaways, off licenses on the high street. So all I've ever known growing up is, you know, and the era we grew up, I guess, is analog. Now I'm trying to think, how do I take my business digital?
Yeah.
How do I adapt?
Exactly. And this is what I remember thinking, because it's so funny now, like, you know, I'm a partner in a hedge fund, I'm a partner in a trading organization, I'm a partner in another investment fund. And even at 16, 18, to me, there was just like, business was just like, oh, he's a businessman. Do you know what I mean? Like that was the extent to it. It's a bit like someone saying, oh, he does sport. Like, was that going to the gym? Is that professional? But like, I didn't have a clue what business was. But again, it's another example of why I think it is important to acquire as many experiences as you can, because there are some things that just grip you in certain ways. And we'll probably talk about that a bit later. But if you're not exposed to them, then perhaps you don't get that spark that captures your attention or something inside you.
Because what you've said there, it just really resonated with me. You're right. When we were young growing up, even your parents would be like, oh, that's so-and-so's kid. He's into sports.
Yeah.
It was such a broad umbrella.
Yeah.
And I wonder whether the internet has something to say for that. Because in those days, you were a business person, you were a sport person, you were a music person.
Yeah.
But all the in-between industries within that industry, we didn't really know about. Yeah. And I wonder whether social media, the internet, like now I feel like it's so pigeonholed, isn't it? So now if I introduce someone, I'll just go, oh, he does high rocks. It's no longer he's an athlete or he's a sports person.
Yeah.
I pick one thing.
Yeah.
But we didn't know those things. Yeah, Halo, yeah.
Halo.
Well, it's true, isn't it?
Yeah. And I think it's getting even worse now because of the way the algorithms work in social media, right? Because once you've expressed even the slightest interest in something, you're getting that chucked at you at the expense of everything else. And I think this is why we have these extreme polarized views and also extreme polarized perceptions of what is and isn't possible in terms of development. But to be fair, mate, like school aside, family aside, there were unique experiences for me in my childhood that I think everyone will have had, but perhaps not reflected on so much. And I'll give you an example. Like, as you're asking that question, I'm thinking like, I remember one particular weekend, right? So we're in Sardinia. I was young. My mum had taken my sister back to the UK to see my grandparents. And I thought, oh yeah, I'm staying with my dad, like the lads weekend. And I remember like going, and this is before health and safety, right, within the Air Force. So like Friday, I'm going into work with my dad. And I'm like, oh, this is cool. I'm on like an RAF base with those top US Air Force, Royal Air Force, hanging around with the lads, feeling mega grown up. And I'm on a runway watching Phantoms, tornadoes launch into the sky. And then the pilots are getting out and being like, oh, you all right, James, do you want to jump? I'm sat in the cockpit and I'm like, this is so fucking cool. And then this is where it all began for me, because I remember clearly very like thinking, why does he get to fly the plane? Mm-hmm. And then that next day, I went and watched the RAF play a rugby match, and I saw one guy scored like 4 tries. It was just a bit, I can't remember who, I was young, but I remember thinking, he's a beast. Like, and I was like, why is he? I had this question in my mind, like, what is it about him why is he scoring all the points? And then that night, I remember with a couple of my dad's mates watching World's Strongest Man. Mm-hmm. And I remember like, again, that question within a day was like locked into my mind in terms of like, why is he the strongest? And I think that's where, for me, that's my earliest memory of this question that's probably dictated how I've spent the rest of my life today and probably the future, to be fair, because it's got me. But is this question around, why do some people excel at the absolute upper limit of human potential and why do others not? Wow. And are these factors controllable? And then from there, I guess as I grew older, that's where I had no interest. I sort of lost interest in reading books. It was about biographies for me. And that's another thing I really remember in terms of my childhood was like, you know, I loved sport as a Chelsea fan. I remember like reading Ruud Gullit, John Luca Vialli's biographies. And then from a military perspective, Bravo 20, I remember reading Sir Peter de la Billière, who was a commanding officer of 22 SAS. His biography like gripped me. And then of course, entrepreneurs, that was another area that jumped out to me, like Branson. And I remember reading Peter Jones's book as well. And I was, again, trying to I didn't know it consciously, but I was almost trying to do what my kind of job is now, but is to what's unique about what's going on here? What can we learn here to increase the probability of success across time? And I think that was my earliest memory in relation to that interest I had that's gone on to almost consume me at a professional level.
It's quite fascinating that you pick that up at such a young age, to be aware of that. Do you know what I mean? If you think about it, most people who get to 25, 30, 40 years old probably still don't really are fortunate enough to find that thing that kind of lights them up inside. We're all searching for that kind of, what is my purpose? What am I here for? What am I meant to do? And the fact that you've noticed that at that young age, I think is outstanding. That
I think it became clearer across time.
One does really well.
Yeah.
Out of 5 women, one does really well. That part, the part where you can notice that there's kind of one that's excelling.
Yeah.
Rather than
and that was real clear to me, boom and boom. And I'm thinking I remember saying to my dad in a conversation, this is where, to be fair, I have to, probably some, again, I do think I've been so lucky with parenting. But I remember once after reading Bravo 20, I was like, oh, Dad, I'd love to be in that. And then I could go and imagine doing close protection for all the most, famous people in the world and that, or these successful people. And my dad was like, why don't you try and be the successful person? And that, I remember literally that conversation and me being like,
it clicked.
Oh yeah, that's interesting. Not that that's necessarily the right thing to do, but I was like, oh, that's an interesting perspective. Do you know what I mean? And it was that resonated in respect to that. But let's talk about that, because
the dad thing, just to stop you there, that's really interesting, because it's just brought up a memory of me as a child, right? So you're going, oh, Dad, I'd love to do that because then I can go and do this for so-and-so, right?
Yeah,
and he's giving you the ultimate tip there. He's going, fuck doing it for so-and-so, be the so-and-so.
Yeah. Why don't you be the guy that has
so
protection?
when I was young, you might have heard in some of the other episodes or when we spoke, I said to you before, I did a load of steroids. I wanted to get big and I wanted people to be scared of me and I wanted to be massive. And my dad would be like, why are you trying to get huge, son? I'd be like, I want people to respect me, Dad, and be fearful of me. And he was like, well, if you have a look at the most powerful men in the world, they're 5'0". They've got the meatheads around them, but they're not the meathead.
Yeah.
So stop trying to become the meathead. And it kind of the same thing.
In a way, isn't it? It's so...
Obviously, it was in Turkish. I'm trying to translate it, but he was like, don't be the big guy who stood as a security next to the guy. Be the guy.
And this sums up human nature, though, because our nature is to be without overcomplicating this, we reason by analogy, don't we? We're like, okay, well, we jump to the first solution. All right, I felt a bit threatened then. Right, I want to be big and hard and defensive. Bang. Rather than thinking oh, why did I feel that? What are the options I've got in terms of confronting that obstacle that's put in front of me? And sort of taking it back to these first principles and then assembling the solution from the ground up. And it's so easy to just jump to the solution. Where it's, the dog bit me, all dogs are evil, I'm going to just run away from dogs. And you get these almost phobias or these beliefs that form.
Preset,
that are inaccurate.
Bias, isn't it?
Yeah, based on one little experience, you cement a belief in your unconscious mind for the rest of your life, and it dictates how you make decisions, how you feel, how you think and act. And that's where childhood is of course, seriously influential in terms of...
I was trying to work out with you, kind of that drive and that passion, because you can see it oozing out of you when you're talking. That's what I was asking about the childhood, and I just went back to your dad a few times. I was thinking, I wonder where that comes from, where that passion comes from. But your dad, you said military in the beginning vaguely, but then you said RAF, right? So he was
Air
RAF,
Force.
Air Force. Pilot?
No, aircraft technician.
Aircraft technician.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm trying to get my head around that eliteness and that excellence, and where is it coming from? But I guess if you've grown up looking at these jet fighters,
and it was just standards as well. I think it's just parents being hardworking. I had older cousins that were playing sport at a high level. Like my cousin was England under 21 football. My other cousins were playing rugby at an elite level. We're all, I guess, inspirational in that respect. And then my dad was competing. He competed in knockdown karate for Great Britain, so he was always training and competing, and it was and I think it's there's this I guess Scottishness about that upbringing. About, do you know what I mean? You brought up with you fucking train hard, you fucking don't give up, you just fucking go for it, and who gives a fuck about the odds? Do you know what I mean? And I think that's one of the cool things as well. When you move abroad, you sort of it brings communities together, right? And you start to appreciate the great things about where you're from. And I remember like just hanging out with my dad and his mates, and you know, there's got a disproportionate amount of Scottish people, I guess, in the military, full stop. But I remember chatting and watching Five Nations rugby at the time, and being like, you got to play for Scotland, not England. And do you know what I mean? All this sort of banter, and like, oh yeah, England have got more people, but that doesn't matter. It's, you know, about this asymmetric odds and the Braveheart shit. You're sort of unconsciously growing up with those stories, and they do. And in a way, it's kind of funny because everything I've gone on to do has always been about trying to create asymmetric risk. How do we take the guerrilla warfare mentality to like, how do 5 of us take down this? How does this small bunch of 22-year-olds, how do we put Deutsche Bank or JP Morgan out of business? You know, whether it's in a business perspective, how do we take this guy that's the probability of success or him becoming a world champion so low? How do we stack every possible fucking edge we can find in his favor? And I love that. That's just something that I feel is part of me, and how it gets me working at my best.
Well, I can see it lights a fire when you talk about it. You've been to university, bro, yeah?
Yeah.
What did you study?
Yeah, so it was a funny one, to be honest, because I didn't want to go to university at the time, and there was a bit of an intervention with my head of sixth form, my mum, and I was sort of brainwashed into going and looking at a few. And one of them was Edinburgh. And I went to Edinburgh University, and I don't know if you've had that feeling where you go somewhere and you're like, this is where I'm meant to be. Mm-hmm. That's what I had when I went to look at Edinburgh University. And so I went on, and in Scotland, the degrees it's a 4-year course, so you can do 2 subjects. So I did sort of psychology, sports science, and then I'd end up staying on for the 5th year to do my master's in performance psychology. Wow. But in effect, what I was studying was the performance sciences. And I guess there were so many things that were amazing about that experience. And the first thing that jumps out was just being at Edinburgh again was just another level up, because again, I talked about school. It wasn't competitive from an academic perspective. I get to Edinburgh, you know, and, you know, I thought there was like 2 private schools in the country. Turns out there's not. Like, I went to Edinburgh and I'm like, right, everyone went to private school. And there's clearly a different culture and attitude towards academic competition. Mm-hmm. And it suddenly became competitive. And that lit something up in me. Yeah. And I was like, it activated this part of me that was great. And it was, again, I was looking to other people and I'm like, oh, wow, this is a standard here. And I'm like, okay, fine, I can get on board with that. And so that was a really sort of powerful thing for me. And then the second thing I'd say is at Edinburgh, like every building you go into is like, it's one of the oldest universities in the UK. And you're like, oh, right, you know, Charles Darwin was, you know, studied here. Adam Smith did his exams here. David Hume worked in this building, you know, and it's just mega inspirational from that perspective. And at the time as well, it was a bit of a sweet spot because J.K. Rowling had just finished, she was like pumping out all the Harry Potter books, and she studied at Edinburgh. She was living at Edinburgh when she wrote them. And a lot of it, I think the story was inspired by some of the architecture and you know, you can see it, can't you, when you watch the films. And it felt like going to Hogwarts. Like I was literally jumping on London's King's Cross, platform 10, not 9 3/4, but getting the train up to Edinburgh. And it was like, it had this like magical, like it was such a great experience.
Psychology.
Yeah. I mean, fell head over heels with that subject, but I mean
it goes hand in hand with what you do.
Yeah.
Right?
To me, it's ultimately like you get the head right, the rest follows. And I remember that first week at Edinburgh, and this is the most significant thing about that, because at the time, again, Edinburgh was the only, I think there's only a handful now, but only university that had a performance psychology course. But in that first week, I remember going to a bunch of lectures, like one was philosophy of science, one was on the subject of expertise, one was on leadership. And I just remember like being in that room, looking like left and right to everyone else in there. And my jaw's on the floor thinking, why the fuck isn't the Prime Minister, every sports manager, politician, business owner in here listening to this? This is like gold. Mm-hmm. Like I couldn't believe that, like what we know about excellence and what we know about predicting success across time and shifting baseline in terms of ability. And I was just like, you know, as far as I was concerned, it should have been breaking news. And I still think a lot of what I learned on that degree program, and then, you know, and don't get me wrong, it's academic and messy, and, you know, I've had to put it together over the years, but it should be taught in schools.
I was literally going to say to you, do you think maybe not in depth as you did, but do you think a summary of that could be taught in schools?
I think it needs to be. I think it's a fight I'd personally would like to pick at some point. It's a big reason for me having an interest to, have conversations like this, because a big part of what I've done, I've been privileged to work at a top level across business, sport, military. But a big part of me now wants to democratize access to that information, because it's no good just being leveraged to the highest bidder. And I absolutely think it needs to be condensed. And look, first up, for me, there's nothing more virtuous than trying to get better at whatever it is you do. Like when anyone, as far as I'm concerned, when anyone anywhere gets better at whatever they do, they make the world a bit better. And, you've got to enhance your ability to contribute, solve problems, eliminate obstacles, shift other people's perceptions of what they're capable of. And it's just the world wins. And that's look, you and I know, we've talked about this sort of stuff before, but we can't wait for politicians to fix the world's problems. And it's not their job, it's our job, and I think the better we all understand how to accelerate our own pursuit of excellence in whatever it is that we care for, manage, or lead in terms of business, then, the better we can do that and go out and save the world. Because let's be honest, some parts of it are a bit of a mess at the moment.
Yeah, I think that the fundamental message of what you do, whatever it is you do it to the best of your ability, is kind of the message you're giving there. And I think that, everyone should be able to resonate with that. Whatever we're doing, whatever our job is, whatever our role is, whether that's being a parent, whether that's a certain job, whether that's a sport. Yeah. Why wouldn't you want to be the best?
And this is
in your own ability, though. I'm not on about best of everyone else. Also,
it's you against
from a comparison perspective. Yeah, just be the best you can be.
100%. And the thing is, it's helping people to understand that they are more powerful than they probably think. They have way more options than they could probably ever imagine in terms of what they're actually capable of, but also that they have way more influence than they probably think. And I think this is why because there's a lack there or a gap there, I think that's why we've got a bit, an apathetic population that's pretty nihilistic and what's the fucking point? Everything's stacked against me. And that's why we've maybe got this
mentality,
epidemic of victimhood, right? And, I understand it, I get it, but there is an ulterior narrative here. And that's where I love having conversations with you like this one, because this is a place where we're not going to wallow in self-pity. We're going to chase down excellence and look for ways to find an edge and make things better. And, the way you make anything better is one step at a time. But I also want to show people a precise set of instructions in terms of doing that, because I understand that a lot of information people get is along the lines of, be positive, be motivated, you just got to be confident, follow your passion. And it's like, okay, good. And it's good that we're getting that message from people out there and online. But the question is, well, how the fuck do I find my purpose? I want to, and I want to feel confident. I want to feel motivated, but I don't know where to start. And I think that's where I want to try and bridge that gap a little bit with some of the stuff we'll hopefully talk about today.
It's almost like giving them practical steps, isn't it, to be able to achieve it?
Yeah, like for instance, you go to the gym, and I think because it's between our ears and behind our eyes, we don't think of our brain like we might do with our body. It's kind of obvious, right? If you want to get into physical shape, like you go to a gym, whether it's just, I'm going to go and do 10,000 steps a day, or I'm going to go and get on a proper strength and conditioning program. You take it as far as you want, but it's kind of obvious and you can see it in someone. It's harder from a psychological perspective because unless you've got a 250 grand SPECT scan, you can't scan someone's brain and be like, oh, that's Arnie's brain. You know what I mean? Or, okay, this is, whoa, terrible posture, hips out, knees lined, and it's kind of trying to make this psychological piece as tangible as what's the back squat for resilience? What's the bench press for confidence?
Love that.
So it's super actionable, because if it's not actionable, then you can't expect people to do it. And, hopefully we'll talk through some of the bits and pieces we can.
Well, let's go on to that. So I've got here #1 international best-selling author. So what's your book called for anyone that wants to?
So it's called Accelerating Excellence.
Okay. And they can get it?
Yeah. Anywhere, Amazon.
Physical copy, digital
physical
copy.
copies. It can be ordered for any bookshop out there.
So there's a passage from it that I'm going to read, and then we can kind of break it down. It says, everyone that excels does so through aligning with a specific set of principles. Whether they realize it or not, through aligning with as many of these principles as possible, we can stack probability so high in your favor that success becomes almost inevitable across time. Now, when you say that everyone who excels is aligned with a specific set of principles, like for anyone listening, what are those principles if they haven't read the book?
Yeah. So
how do they come about?
Well, yeah, so that's a really good question. So what performance science does, and what I love most about studying it or getting introduced to it, is that, like, traditionally science studies the average, right? So if you think of ability across time, so if we're measuring ability across, I'll draw a little picture here.
Here we go.
If we're measuring,
he's an artist.
Yeah, I am. So if this is time,
yeah,
and this is ability,
yeah.
What scientists aim to do is identify a nice trend like that, right? And they'll plot. So this could be how long it takes the average person to learn to read, write, walk, or talk, or at a professional level, how long it takes a military unit to acquire set skills in parachuting, diving, a boxer to get to an ABA elite level, whatever it might be. Now, what science does traditionally is aim to identify individuals that fall below the average and then design interventions to get them back on track. So, for instance, it could be like you're overweight.
Yeah.
You're a risk. Now we want to get you back to not overweight. We want to get you super healthy. Mm-hmm. We just want to get you back to the average. Now, nice little trends like this when you're an academic scientist, get your research published. That's what gets you paid. That's what gets you promoted. Every now and then you get individuals up here who've got massive ability with less time, and we describe them as outliers. And these are often deleted with a traditional approach because they risk messing up that data. Now, what performance science does is it flips this on its head, because the key thing here is that you cannot understand excellence through studying the average. So in performance science, we delete all this and just focus on these. The outlier individuals and organizations that have performed at the upper limits of human potential, and then aim to understand what are the causal mechanisms that have enabled them to excel across time. And good news is, like, performance is never a coincidence. Everyone that excels does so through aligning with a specific set of conditions. There's three main ones I want to talk about today. And when you align with these conditions, you're driven by an internal compulsion to do the right things at the right time. You don't need this Herculean willpower to do what it takes to excel. And in effect, there's these three key areas we'll talk about. Within each of these, there's key principles. And the more of the principles you align with, the further and faster your rate of progress will be.
Okay.
So, like, the first one is the most important. Like, in terms of you're looking to optimize this isn't just for the sake of performance, by the way, this is for the sake of having a life. But if you're looking to optimize either, the number one thing that you absolutely must master is mechanism one. And just like a baseball bat has a location at which the ball rebounds away further and faster than if struck at any other point, so do you, and so does everyone. And we call this performing from your sweet spot. Mm-hmm. So in psychology, it's born out of what we call self-concordance or self-determination theory. And the basic premise is that in order to excel, you need to pursue goals that align with the qualities that make you unique.
Yeah.
And there are three. So the first one is your strengths, the things that come naturally to you. Then we've got your interests, the things you're instinctually drawn to. And then we've got your values, which are the things that are most important to you. And I'll draw another little picture here. So we think of this as strengths, interests, values. You want to identify goals that exist here, that leverage all three.
For anyone that's listening, James has drawn three circles, and basically where all three circles intersect, that little section there.
Yes,
where
the intersection and convergence of those three circles is the point we need to understand and pursue goals that align with. The reason that performing goals from your sweet spot is that it activates your psychological firepower. It's called what we call your dopaminergic incentive reward system. So this is from an evolutionary perspective, the part of your brain that compels you to move forward confidently and assertively in the face of adversity. So in effect, your brain gives you all the good chemicals. So dopamine, serotonin, anandamide, oxytocin, norepinephrine, gives you all the good stuff. And like GlaxoSmithKline or Moderna wish they could design a pill that could give you this feeling. It's like probably like a combination of cocaine, Ritalin, Adderall.
Reminds me of the Limitless drug. Is it like Limitless, the film?
Well, I think that's almost the metaphor for performing from your sweet spot. That's kind of what happens. Because let's be honest, right? There's two yous and they exist on a continuum. There's one at this end and one at this. And one is you at your absolute best. And we've all been there at times. Mm-hmm. Maybe it's for fucking a split second, but we've all had parts of that. And then at the other end, there's a you at your absolute worst. And we've all been there too. And it's about identifying and understanding, well, okay, when you were at this end of the continuum, what was going on? What was unique about those conditions? Because that will point towards clues in terms of your strengths, interests, and values. But, and this is a key point, right? In terms of the currency of elite performance, we talk about confidence, motivation, resilience. Well, there aren't people that are born without the confidence, resilience, motivation part of their brain. There are just people who are pursuing goals that fail to activate that in the first place.
Got you.
And you activate that psychological firepower through pursuing concordant goals. And I'd love to go a level deeper quickly here because to make it really tangible. So in terms of your strengths, the reason strengths are so important are that they're the things that come naturally to you. And we've got physical strengths. And it's so obvious, right? At school, there's that kid who's just fucking rapid, right? You can bang 60 meters and you're just like, how the hell, right?
Massive.
Yeah, or just a beast, right? And that's an advantage and a disadvantage, by the way. So if you're Anthony Joshua, natural strength is his physicality. If you were to profile him as an athlete, you're like, wow, he's got strength for boxing. Not as a jockey, or not as a 1,500 meter runner.
Or as an F1 driver.
Or as an F1 driver, yeah. And this is the key thing about strengths. It's so important to leverage because they dictate two things. So strengths are effectively your baseline ability and your responsiveness to training. So for example, if you and I are pursuing the same goal, but we say we have the same baseline ability, but you're more responsive to training to me, then for every hour of practice, you have 2 breakthrough moments and I have 1. 6 months from now, you're going to be so far ahead of me, I'm never catching you up, no matter how ambitious I am or how hard I try. And again, sporting analogy, physically, it's so obvious because it's just like, oh my God, he's rapid. Oh my God, look at the size of him. He's a number 8. He's going to be a heavyweight boxer. But it also works in other areas. For example, what we call like cognitive anthropometry. And we know in sport, for example, when we study these outliers, like if you look at rowing, if you don't have a hip to knee ratio of above X, a certain length, and if you don't have a VO2 max, so your ability to process oxygen above a set limit, you'll never win a gold medal. And
wow, so it's that
it's that black and white,
Fuck.
Or you're 1 in a billion. There's probably, if you looked across all the sports, there's maybe 1 or 2 small exceptions, but the probability is extremely low. And it's the same from a cognitive perspective. So for example, some people, just like some people are quick, some people are got great lungs physically. It's the same when it comes to some people have a gift with words. Some people have a gift with numbers. Some people have a gift with artistic ability. Some people have a gift with emotional intelligence and their ability to communicate with other people.
Can I just jump in there? Because it's something stuck with me. So 2 things I want to say. So one, biomechanically, some of us are set up more gifted than others, right?
Yeah.
So, recently I was told biomechanically my feet aren't very good for running, but I really enjoy running.
Right.
So I'm never going to do really well in it, but I just enjoy running. So biomechanically, you're set up a certain way. Physiologically, you're set up a certain way. Can either of these be trained to break that mold, or is it the fact that you're set that way? Because from a physical form, if you're tall, you're never going to be short. If you're short, you're never going to be tall. But could you argue from a brain perspective, you could train it to change? You could train to be good at numbers. You could train to be good at words. So really good question. And first off, I don't like the advice that you were given that, your feet aren't good for running. Like so on that real quick, it's a case of you can get better at anything. Yes. But you cannot excel at anything. Got you.
So anyone with the right strategy and effort can get better at anything. You can get better. Anthony Joshua can get way better at a 5K time. He can get really good, but he ain't going to win a gold medal. And that's where I'm working at. I'm working at the gold medal level. But the same principles apply. It makes sense to, if you can, pursue goals where your strengths are an advantage. And from a cognitive perspective, there's two aspects. One is like the pure ability to process information, whether that's words, numbers, art. But then there's also your personality. So you've got this personality type, and it's relatively permanent. Some people, like you, are super extroverted, intuitive. They like conversation, they like discussion, they like to pull on threads and learn through conversation. Other people, give me the book, I don't want to talk to you. And if you want to optimize the way you achieve in your craft, then you need to align your approach with who you are. A lot of this is about know yourself and to your own self be true.
Okay, that makes sense. And then, but the second part of the question then is, we have one life and we're active for, let's say, from 15 years old to 60 years old. This finding your strength piece, I struggle with it because sometimes I think like life's so short, you haven't got that much time to try everything to find your strength. So for anyone that's listening, like you might be fortunate and at 15, the PE teacher makes you do 100 meters and you're fucking ace and you're like, oh, this is my calling. Right, but some people
it's a hard sport to succeed at.
You know what I mean? I'm 35 years old, and I don't know where my excellence lies. I don't know where my purpose is in terms of. I don't know how to align my biomechanical, physiological, psychological stuff. What am I designed for, and how do I find that strength?
Well,
do you see what I mean?
Well, the first of three questions you need to answer is what are your strengths, and the way you there's multiple ways you can find that out. In the book, there's a ton of questions, but in effect. Ty, like you do know, you just pretending not to know. Like it's quite obvious.
I'm being awkward to you.
Yeah. Because you can look back to. So the first question is, where have you had a baseline ability in your life? Where's your baseline been higher than others? Like I know where some of your strengths are clearly, and you fucking know. And then also, where have you been more responsive to
I'm probably talking more
training?
physical than I'm talking probably more sport-based,
so
actually. Because you're right, yes. From a very young age, I would always be the leader of the group.
Yeah.
I would always take control of something and solve a problem.
You're great with people. You're a strong communicator. You like being around people. You're an energizing guy. These are all examples of personality strengths.
Like I never played a lot of sport growing up. I wasn't that kid on the curb playing football. If you know, I never did a lot of that because I don't know, life just wasn't like that. So now I'm at a point like really, I weightlifted most of my life because I wanted girls to like me and to be cool and to fit in.
External factors.
And then from 2020, really from COVID to now is when I've discovered kind of running and functional stuff and a bit more performance-based training as opposed to, but I don't know where I sit in. Like I haven't discovered something that I'm naturally very good at, but I enjoy all of it.
Yeah,
from a physical
and that's
perspective.
The thing. The first thing is like, for what purpose? The physical. Maybe your goal. To be honest, mate, you're in terms
hobbyist, aren't I? I'm not.
So that's part of it. Like the reality is, you're probably not going to go to Olympic Games. So like in terms of optimizing your strengths, we're probably talking about that entrepreneurial level, right? Yeah, that's your sport.
More.
Yeah, it's your sport. So and the physical, of course, comes into that, but it's predominantly cognitive and personality based. That's where your super strengths are, and you probably want to leverage. But still, in terms of strength, it's pretty easy. You can go and do some real baseline tested components of fitness tests. So easy to do. Do a baseline strength test. Any decent personal trainer or strength and conditioning coach will take you through this. I mean, Team GP literally have tests that you can do with your kids to tell like what anthropometry they've got. Oh wow, they've got the perfect mechanics for rowing, perfect for powerlifting.
But see, people don't know this. That's what I'm saying. That's the first I've heard of this.
Yeah, and it's frustrating. I mean, I remember the Australians are savage. Like every kid at a certain age in primary school get tested this, and the parents will be like, "By the way, your kid's got ridiculous aptitude for this sport. If you want to push them that way." It's not like you therefore get conscripted to go and be Australia's next javelin world
super
champion.
Interesting. And I think more. I don't know if schools do it in the UK. I don't recall anyone doing that to me.
It. But you'll know physically, right? You know versus your peers, even just with your pals around town, you'll know that. Right? Okay, when you do workouts, mate, you're strong.
I'm
strong.
very strong.
I know you've got a bit of a trainer. Very strong. I don't know about that, but
bring it on.
But. Yeah, you're
like
a strong
naturally,
guy.
in a sense, if I haven't trained for 6 months, I can go back into the gym and I can still lift pretty heavy weight, considering I've not been in the gym 6 months.
100%.
It always just stays
You've got
with
an
me.
aptitude for it, yeah. And that fact that you don't lose it is a sign that it's an inherent strength. It's something that's come naturally to you. And so, yeah, strength training is an obvious one. And you can go and do these basic. Okay, what am I like with speed? What am I like with endurance? What am I like with power? What am I like with mobility? And
you know places that will do this. I don't mean the strength thing, but like you can go get like VO2 tested and all
We'll
these.
put some links up where anyone can go and do all this
just so if people want to kind of go and have a little.
We'll put some links. It's fun. It's playful.
Yeah.
The best one to do though is so we talked about strengths in terms of physical and cognitive, and you can go online and do cognitive test batteries. It will say like, wow, you're freakishly good at this, by the way. They'll give you a bunch of tests to do, and then you'll be like, oh wow, you're really good at this, and oh, you really struggle with that versus the rest of the population. And then you can do it. We'll put a link up to some of the personality tests, like Myers-Briggs, Ocean personality test, free online. Mega fun to do on like a Sunday night with your missus or something like that. And it will spit out your personality type, and it will say, look, these are the strengths associated with it. These are the weaknesses. And guess what? When you pursue goals that leverage your strengths, where your weaknesses don't matter, you've got a higher probability of succeeding in that space.
This is like that book. There's that book. Is it Surrounded by Idiots with a different color personality
I've not read that
traits?
one yet.
Yeah.
Maybe.
Some companies have even started putting it in their bio, in their footers.
Yeah.
So when I'm emailing you, it will say my personality is red or whatever. So you know how I accept information, how to talk to me, and not to clash with my personality.
100%. And it's a real useful tool. But the second question you need to ask, because strengths are going to dictate your responsiveness to training. But the second thing you need to question you need to answer is this: what are your interests? Mm-hmm. And you know what your interests are. And this is people, we all know what our strengths, interests, and values are. We just don't take the time to reflect. But the interest, the reason they're so important, so interests are the things that you're instinctually drawn to. And you don't get to pick your interests, they pick you.
That's interesting.
And and the reason they're so important is they'll dictate your ability to invest time in a specific area. So if you're sincerely interested in financial markets, it's not hard to spend all weekend studying them. And it means that someone with the same ability, you've got an edge on them because it's easier for you to invest time. And they act like an analgesic to the unrelenting immersion required to invest so much time on a single specific area.
This makes me think of school. And, a lot of us say, I was great at school, but I didn't really concentrate. I lost my attention span, was very short. But this goes back to what you just said about interest, right?
Well, everyone's got a short attention span for the shit they don't care about.
Yes. This is exactly what I was going to say. And then I guess the trick is then finding something that you're interested in from a business perspective. I'm always thinking about business that you can then maybe make money out of.
Yeah.
Do you understand what I mean?
Yeah,
so like,
it's linking
I really
those
enjoy socializing with people. I love talking to people. I love having a coffee, going for a run, all those kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But how do I then make that into, maybe open a coffee shop, maybe open a gym, maybe open a...
this is where the schooling, like it's hard, right? Because the government have to set up schools to, it's hard.
Everyone.
You cater for everyone, and you've got to be able to train teachers to do a consistent. So it's easy to sit here and say, oh, this is how it should be done. But yeah, if you can make learning game-based activity where it's like, we're going to learn about accounting and business, but you're going to set up a business or you're going to run an event or that probably would have lit that part of you that clearly was lit at a later date in your life. But
I couldn't do any of it at school. So if you think about like the organizing stuff I do now, like what I do day to day in work, they were the subjects that I least liked at school. They were the ones that I least connected with, but I do it for a living.
But you couldn't see the link between the value of that and how it links to your true concordant goal. And when you do, it suddenly becomes easier to engage in those I work with a lot of professional athletes, like world champion level, Olympic level, and in the North American sports. And like those guys got into NFL because they love playing football. They don't love strength and conditioning. They don't love mobility. They don't love, and if you told them to do that at school, they would have been like, oh, fuck that. I'm not going to yoga. Do you know what I mean? I want to go and play football. But now they're in the NFL and they've got this goal that is, I want to go to Super Bowl and win. Okay, what does it take? And then it's suddenly easier to identify with things that before that you perhaps perceived as, how does this even fit into where I'm going, who I am and where I'm going? So interests are really important there. And it's like, you got that pal that's just like motorbikes. You just see a motorbike and I've got loads of those mates. Motorbikes seem to get people like that, or fishing or random shit, right? But people are like, oh, it just gripped me. And they're the sort of people that on a Sunday will like take their motorbike apart to put it back together a bit different. And that's an example of being sincerely interested in something. So in terms of interest, it's about reflecting on where do you spend time? What do you spend money on? If I went into your house and looked at what books you got on the shelf, what books are they? And I mean the books you've actually read as well. And then in the other aspect to that is like an interesting question to reflect on is if every job in the world was say 25 grand a year, what job would you want to do? And the other question is, this get a level higher. If every job in the world, you can have any job you want, and you got to do it 8 hours a day, 5 days a week as a minimum, but you're not allowed to tell anyone what that job is. And if you succeed in it or you fail in it, no one knows or gives a shit either way.
Cool.
What would you do? And that'll give you some clues. And this is where it's about playing around and reflecting with this stuff to work. It's really about working out who you are.
I always used to say, something I post probably once a year on my story, like, if the concept of money didn't exist, would you still get up and do what you do every day? And it's kind of the same as what you just said. If we took away the kind of financial reward, if everyone got paid the same amount or money didn't exist, would you get up still and do what you do? That'll show you if you're interested in it, wouldn't it? Or if you're just doing
absolutely.
Pay the bills.
And the reality is, of course, for some people is that what they're most interested in is their family. So therefore, the work's almost like the NFL player doing his mobility.
Got you.
Do you know what I mean? And that's an important point I just want to make there. It's not all about, because the goal could be, like, my family come first and my job is something that supports this, a lifestyle. And that's a concordant goal, right? And it's going to give you, you're going to feel good about it. Where it becomes a problem is if, I got into investment bank. It's the why, right? I got into investment banking because I want to make a load of money.
Yeah.
And what you'll do is be very fucking average at investment banking and work yourself to death. And you'll feel the emotional pain of doing so. And it's the same with any role. You're doing things for external factors. You're capping the amount of psychological firepower that your brain and body's going to give you. And you certainly won't excel.
Just going off a little bit there, because you said the word goal and it triggered me to ask. So what's your thoughts on goal setting?
So my thoughts on goal setting are that you need to set concordant goals. So you need to, goal setting starts with this thing we're talking about here, understanding what your strengths are, your interests. The last component there is values. So like in terms of, in the context of your life now or your career now, the question to answer is like, what is most important to you? And the reason it's so important is that your values will dictate the intensity you bring to the table. So we bring the blood, sweat, and tears to achieve our goals because doing so fulfills what's important to us. And maybe that's king and country, maybe it's save the environment, maybe it's financially to provide for your family. And again, from an evolutionary mechanism, your values act a bit like, it's similar to the effect you'd have if you had kids. So in terms of the goal pursuit, it's that, well, okay, my kid's crying and lying in their own mess at 3 a.m. I don't necessarily want to get up and deal with that right now, but there's no chance in hell I'm not going to do it. And that's the exact behavior I see when I'm working with top performers when, okay, I know you've had a long day and there's been media and that, but you need to engage in this or you need to engage in that. It's like, yeah, okay, I don't mind, I want to do it, but there's no chance in hell it's not going to get done. Yeah. And that's where Elon Musk's at. And that's where Jeff Bezos is at, right? It's to them, it's the same neurological connection as a mother might have to their child as they have to their business. And they're not going to leave their child in their own mess, metaphorically.
The values piece is an interesting one because I've done a lot with that with a therapist actually. Okay. To kind of discover myself and, like, what do I actually value? What are my values? Slightly probably different to yours because yours are performance-based, but I'm just talking about general life values. Yeah. But they also change, right? So what you valued a decade ago isn't what you value now. Yeah. And
that's a really good point because your strengths and interests are relatively permanent across life, but the values are the bit that change. And that's why it's so important to keep a finger on the pulse. Because when you're right, like I've seen this in businesses when, we hire in junior traders or, and they're just like, I just want the experience. I want the opportunity to work with you guys. I want to do X, I want to do Y. And then they come in and they do that. And then they're like, they've learned X, they've learned Y, they've satisfied that value. Then the next one emerges. I want the opportunity to compete. I want my own book. I want to be able to do this, and then they get that and they do that.
Human nature, huh?
And then the next one emerges. I want to get paid. I want recognition. Do you know what I mean? And this is where, like, when you get values conflict, that's why wars start and marriages end. So it's really important to align with that.
Yeah, the values piece is definitely one that's important in relationships as well, right?
Massively.
You find couples that get together. My wife and I got together. She was 19. We were very young. We've been together 12 years. So we're not the same people, mate.
Yeah,
we're not the same. We don't have the same values. So then you have to then kind of relearn to love one another, right? For that relationship to be successful. And that's why a lot of times you see them break down. Right?
It's like a garden that goes through seasons and you got to think about the gardener in a way. Like you've got to and this is where it's a lot easier to maintain it as you go rather than to be like, oh, fuck, the garden's a state. We need to bulldoze it or like sell it or just bomb it.
And even the other flip side of it is I've seen in people, and, you know, I've maybe noticed in myself as well over the years, is your values may change, but they may have been the same, but you've been hiding them because you want to fit in.
Yeah.
You know, to an extent. So if your value was
subordinated yourself to be in the relationship in the first place.
Relationship, job, whatever it might be, the ethos of the company, you know, you think, oh, that won't go down well, that's not cool at the moment, or that's not in at the moment, those values.
But
so
mate,
I'm just going to follow
that. It's a
that.
banging point. And in terms of this whole concordance piece, it's why a lot of people struggle, because it's tough, right? Even going back to like school, you know, if you're at a school that plays rugby, then you kind of, if you want to fit in, and
you have to play rugby.
Maybe you play rugby even though you really love football, or you actually really love trampolining or something opaque and obscure, but you're like, fuck, I don't really want to tell the lads I actually love trampolining. But do you know what I mean? Do you know what I mean? But it's, and that's where like, it's so hard to do. But the first challenge, of course, is trying to identify, well, who am I and where am I optimized in terms of these strengths, interests, and values? But then secondly, it's having the confidence to take steps in those directions. But the key message here is that, like, we need to move away as a society from this, you can be anything you want to be, to the more accurate, you can be a hell of a lot more of who you already are.
Love that.
But you have to do the work to work out, well, who are you and where are you optimized? And it's that whole classic, you know, greatest poker players aren't the ones that dealt the best hands. They're the ones who leverage the hands they've been dealt best.
Yep.
And it's about being honest about who you are.
This goes back to parenting as well, though, right? So, like, and education, you know, generational.
Yeah.
Also generational. So, like, you know, you're always growing up with your parents saying you can be anything you want, son or mum.
And it's
they
positive
mean
intentions.
They mean it from the best place in the world. But
it's
actually,
a toxic
if we look
message.
at what you just said, it probably isn't the best thing.
No.
To say to every child.
No, you can get better at anything you want to get better at. But if you truly want to...
But you're also also for anyone that's listening here, you can be anything you want. Let me rephrase that. You can be anything you want to a certain level.
Yeah.
That's probably the correct way of, because you're talking about excellence here. You're talking about the 1%, the 5%, the top. And everyone can't be all of them. Yeah. Anyone can't be all of them.
That's that. Yeah. 100%. However, there's still this, you can't, if there's a lot of people that pretend to be people they aren't. And they think that,
especially in this day and age.
Yeah, of course. And it's like, and I get it, people want to fit in. It's life's fucking hard, right? But when you bend too much, you pay a price. And it's not just in terms of performance. I mean, mate, we talk about mental health epidemic. Majority of it's because people aren't pursuing goals that they're sincerely aligned with. Give someone like, you cannot evoke positive emotion if you do not have a meaningful goal. And to have a meaningful goal, you must, and I'm not saying, when I say strength, I don't mean you need to be the top 10 fastest kids in the country, but you need to be this end of the continuum, you know? So it's, I
love that, what you just said a minute ago, that meaningful purpose.
Yeah, well, if you don't have a meaningful goal to pursue, your brain won't give you, your brain is designed to pursue goals. It's designed to identify an object and throw a spear at it, chase it, pick it up. That is what our brain has evolved over millennia to do. And if you don't have a meaningful goal to pursue, then it will not give you all those hormones I was talking about in terms of positive emotion to get after it. You can see people who are objectively in shit positions, but who have got really meaningful goals. And to them, it's like, I'm on it. Yeah, I'm up. I'm doing this. I'm okay. Yeah, my house might be shit state. My bank account's a fucking mess. Second you get a meaningful goal, you start to activate your psychological firepower. And that's why this is so important.
So let's touch on something then, because there's a lot of mixed things going around at the moment about goal setting, whether it's good or toxic or right or wrong. And probably the meaningful goal element there probably already answers this, but there's people that tell you should always set goals, right, and work towards a goal. And then there's this narrative of don't set goals, because if you achieve them, you feel empty after. What next? If you don't achieve them, you feel like a failure. So it's a lose-lose from goal setting. I've heard this narrative a lot at the moment.
Yeah.
Do you see what I mean?
Yeah.
What's your thoughts on all that?
So I think it's all about context, right? Like personally, the way I having studied this, the optimal way for me is right, okay, I have this, instead of a goal, I'll call it like a target condition. There's this long-term target condition about how I want things to look. And there might be some outcomes associated with that in terms of like numbers, whether that's a bench press or a bank account. And then there's going to be like a bit of what I describe as a pattern of working, like how do I want my day to look in terms of a goal, target. You know, I'd like to be waking up at this time. I'd like to be feeling like this. I'd like to be engaging in these activities, you know, and that's almost like the process element. And then I think that's great and I'll park that. But for me, I often use this concept of like win the day. Like excellence is really just a series of days repeated across time. And if you can win each day, you start stacking and compounding your gains. And
reminded me of James Clear. He's got, there's a quote of his I use that says, just have one good day and then repeat it.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing. Again, a lot of this is about reflection, taking the time to step back, just like we were talking about with the concordance piece of performing from your sweet spot. Who are you and where you optimize? But also let's think about in terms of goals, what does a good day look like for you? And let's be realistic with all the realities of constraints that exist in your life in terms of like, okay, and you can break the day into like 4 areas. Like I wake up. How am I waking up? How am I feeling? Am I well rested? Am I jumping out of bed? If I'm not, how do I make that? And a good way to do this is almost like, how do I make my mornings less shit? If you're in a really dark place, how do you just make it a little less frustrating than it is now? Then there's that, of course, that working element. So, you know, whether it's your commute to work, that travel to do whatever it is you do, how do you want to structure your days in terms of what activities you're engaging in, what conversations you're having, what's the mindset you bring into those? Where are you finding periods of the day to just detach and switch off for a bit? Where are you finding what part of the days are you going to push and really like, you know, step out your comfort zone a little bit? And then again, that closing the day from that evening routine, how do you want to end your days? How do you want to come home? How do you want to be greeted by your partner when you get in? Maybe you should have a conversation about that if it's not optimal. Again, it's one of those, and these things that you do every day are really fucking important, you know? So for instance, if you do exercise, you go to the gym, get it right. Go to a gym you enjoy, make the journey fun. If you travel to work every day and it's a shit commute, try and make it a little less shit. If you're coming home to your partner every day and it's a bit of a difficult one, think about how you might want to structure that to just make it a little better. And then, of course, the same with your evening routine. How do you want to be spending your time? And we talk about this in elite sport in terms of like, you know, there's junk recovery in terms of I just sit down, mong out and just put Netflix on and just like, how do you make that actually a bit more meaningful? Like you still watch Netflix, but like, why don't you spend half an hour thinking about what things you might want to learn? Maybe we can crack a documentary, then we can watch a movie, or just make it being a bit more conscious about how you're spending your time so you can profit from the time that you're spending.
Yeah, I find that quite interesting. Different sort of, from the narrative what I was talking about, where if you reach a goal, you're going to be upset because there's that quote, isn't there? The top of one mountain is the bottom of the next.
Yeah.
It's fucking never ending.
And that's
and human nature, innately, we get greedier, we want more. Like it's never enough, is it?
Yeah. And again, this is one of the foundational elements of any performance program, and nothing comes before it, is pursuing concordant goals. Because if your goals are truly concordant, the goal shouldn't be to, when you identify who you are and what you're about, it's not about the goal. It's about expressing yourself in your craft at the highest levels. So it's not about winning the championship or the world title, you know. And when we do goal setting with everyone I work with in every business I'm a partner in, you know, we sort of use this phrase that celebrating success isn't the end of the improvement cycle. Setting the next development plan is. And it's like you've got to fall in love, cliched as it is to say, with the journey. You've got to be in love with that day. Because if you're doing it just for that one-off unique experience, yeah, it's a hard fall. If you even get there.
Yeah. That's just, it resonates with me because I repeatedly go back into this cycle of, if I get there, I'll be X. If I win that, I'll be X. You know, like, you know, this whole thing of
pedestal putting.
Yeah, if I achieve that, I'll be happy. If I have that relationship, I'll be happy. If I have that car, I'll be happy. You know, we all have these kind of things. But actually, even now, like I'm training for London Marathon and I'm like, oh, I just want to do the London Marathon, have the experience, you know, and just experience it, get the medal. But I'm not really thinking long enough and I'm not necessarily loving the journey, am I? I'm just aiming for that one thing. And this is what I'm probably meant when, because a lot of people goal set not in the way that you're talking about. Yours is much deeper. that goal setting effectively is a way of life as opposed to an end result.
Yeah.
Whereas I'm like, right, I'm going to get to London Marathon, I'm going to experience it, and then I'm probably not going to run a marathon again.
Yeah.
That's not a good goal, right? Because I'm not actually.
It's just an isolated obligation,
like a tick box.
Yeah, exactly. And it's just occasionally useful to ask yourself questions about, okay, I'm going to do this over, and it's framing it slightly differently. Okay, it's not because it's not just a marathon. What you're actually doing is you're putting yourself through a unique challenge. Okay, I've got this finite time. I'm in this current condition. I need to get to here. I'm gonna have to challenge myself from a psychological perspective. There's going to be I'm going to be out of my comfort zone to an extent. I'm going to have to exercise some discipline here if I'm going to be prepared. And it's like, okay, these are all good skills to develop. And it's about making it bigger than just the pure event itself. But then also importantly asking that question, how do I make this an enjoyable, meaningful experience?
Yeah.
Who can I do it with? How can I use this to...
I think when we're young, we just probably 15 to 25, 15 to 30 maybe, you sort of just plod through life, don't you? Because if you feel like it's never ending, and you just do what makes you happy, and you do a bit of this and do a bit of that. Then you get to this. I saw a meme this morning that said, "No one told me that when you hit 30, everyone starts running marathons." When you get to this point, you reach probably 30 was the pinnacle for me. I'm 35 now, so it's about right. I've had a 5-year development journey, I guess.
Yeah.
Of now all of a sudden when you're like, fuck, it is finite. It's not infinite.
Yeah.
And this sort of tick box mentality that we've got in society where, and I'm guilty of it as well. You know, I want to do a race marathon. I've done loads, but not in a race environment. And I want to do London because it's iconic. But am I doing it for the right reason? Or am I doing it because when I'm on my deathbed, I want to tick through skydive? Yeah, I've experienced that. I know what that's like.
Yeah.
Is it for the right reason or is it for the wrong reason? And arguably, does it matter?
No, well, only you'll know that. But here's the thing, right? You see a lot of people and everyone's different. If you really want to excel at what it is you do, then you have to sacrifice other things. And some people who don't quite know what they do, a symptom you'll see in them is they'll say yes to everything.
Guilty.
Yeah, but that's also a personality type as well. So it's about the context behind the action. Some people are doing it because they're like, I like experiencing lots of different things. I'm a generalist, but other people will. Some people also jump around in jobs and careers because they haven't maybe taken the time to actually reflect on, hey, what do I really want to be doing, and how do I get the most out of myself in that respect? Yeah,
the yes man thing.
Yeah,
that resonates with me for two reasons.
It's that classic, Alice in Wonderland bit, right? Where, which way do you want to go? And I'm like, you're going to go, well, should I go left or right? And I'm like, well,
or what are you having on the menu? You know, like when what are you choosing to eat? You know, when you're with your mates, what are you going to have?
Yeah.
What are you going to have?
Yeah.
I'm bad for it. And like I do it with anytime if I go out and eat with Billum.
Yeah.
He done it the other day. Purposely, I was like, what are you ordering for dessert? He's like, I'm ordering this, but he's ordered the other thing. Because he knows I get FOMO. So I always get food envy, man. Yeah. Like if I go out with my wife, I'm the sort of guy, I'm quite explorative. I quite like trying new things.
But
so
maybe
pick
that's
a new
part
thing
of
off
your
a
nature,
menu.
right?
She'll eat the same thing. Say we go to Wagga, she's got one meal she's eaten for a decade. She never tried anything else, but she's fucking happy with it every time it comes.
Yeah. Well,
I try different meals. Something comes, I'm like, oh, and then her meal looks great. I'm like,
Yeah. But that's fine. That's mainly personality based. But like,
so your three. So if we go back to this, right? So winning principles, right? So we've gone through three. They're the main.
So that's the first mechanism. There's two other things that you need to get right after that.
Fuck me, that's only one.
Yeah.
All right, okay. So
that's step one.
Okay, step one of those three.
Yeah.
What's step two?
Step two is right. So if you're doing those three things, if we're screening people into elite development programs and they're performing goals that leverage their strengths in areas they're interested in for organizations that align with their values.
Yeah.
We've got this potential, right? We've maximized the hardware we're bringing into the organization or into the program, or you're maximizing the hardware you've got. And however, there was plenty of people that had the same potential to excel as Cristiano Ronaldo that didn't. And like, why? And it's because they failed to get this next bit right. And this is high quality practice. And I guess this is where we have my first rant in terms of journalists that write books on human performance. But again, the 10,000 hours rule is one that I think a lot of people have heard about. Yeah. And it's a terrible, inaccurate message.
Really? I still use that every day. 10 years or 10,000 hours to master your craft.
Mate, if it takes you 10,000 hours to excel, there's something seriously wrong with your methodology.
Really?
100%. And look, of course it's relative, right? If you want to be a chess grandmaster, maybe you're going to have to do 26,000 hours. But, I've seen multiple people go from 0 to Olympic athlete, 0 to a hedge fund manager, 0 to special forces superhero in way less. So that study that he got that, Gladwell got that 10,000 hours from was a study on violinists, time it took them to become experts in playing the violin, whatever grade that might be.
Yeah.
There were 14 of them. One did it in 28,500 hours. One did it in 2,700 hours. The average time was actually 11,500. And in typical journalist fashion, it's like this. 10,000 hours, that sounds nice. Let's find a load of confirming evidence that supports that. It's a nice story to sell. So reality, what we'd do as performance scientists is probably run hundreds of those studies, then identify these individuals, the individual in this case that did it in 2,700 hours, and work out, right, what was unique about that person versus the rest? And that's where we find out things like, their strengths, they had a higher baseline strengths, they had a higher responsiveness to training. There was all these sorts of things that we've talked about so far. So the key message here is it's not how much time you spend practicing, it's how much time you spend practicing under specific conditions. And there are 7. So this is about maximizing the quality of your practice. And the first thing you need to do is identify what it takes to win in your craft. So a good example of this is in tennis. So in tennis, 86% points won are won through the first serve, return serve, and second serve. So therefore, and then when you go in and you look at like how people are training tennis, people are spending like 20% of their time training the things that dictate 86% of results. So it's understanding, well, what wins you points in your craft, and then focus your effort there. So, and this dements me, and people would be so surprised. Like, you still go into, I'm talking Premier League clubs, top teams in North America, and elite athletic programs and Olympic programs, and you go in and you look, and unfortunately, there's still poor practice with alignment in terms of these principles. And you go into top tennis clubs, you'll see people, for example, 50-round volleying. Never happens in a tennis match. So don't fucking do it in training. Do you know what I mean? Or like the between legs drop shot. It's not going to, like, never, and the message is like, play around with that.
Yeah.
But never prioritize that over the first serve, return serve, or second serve. So you need to know what it takes to win and focus your effort on those things.
I mean, that tells me that your coach is super important, who you choose as your coach in any craft.
Yeah. And this is the sort of thing a good coach will do. That. Yeah. And it's literally a question you cannot really ask really directly, what wins, and if they can't give you the data, then or like some headline numbers like that, then there's probably if I was going in, and part of my role now is to like punch in, and I kind of do like sledgehammer interventions on development programs, sports teams, and that's one of the first things I'm going to look at. Like, okay, tell me what wins you points in your craft, and if they're like, I'm like, right, well, that's the fucking first problem. Yeah. We need to work that out, because otherwise, what we're trying to build here, you need to know what the second part.
Yeah,
is what I'd call learning by doing. And I think this is where maybe lay people could sometimes go a bit too wrong, especially when you don't have a coach or a constraint on you. And it's this whole piece around, like, knowing a lot about pianos doesn't mean you can play one. Do you know what I mean? You have to do it.
Yeah.
Like, as soon as you've read enough about making investments, make an investment if you want to become a good investor. As soon as you've read a lot of books about opening moves in chess, start playing games of chess. Like, learning by doing and simplified simulations, the real thing, are where you really accelerate learning. Next up, we're talking about, it's a big one on ownership. Ultimately, it's on you. Like, it's your career, it's your future, it's your responsibility. Like, you take the lead in it all. And this is the thing, right? Coach can explain it to you, but he can't understand it for you. Advanced skills must be discovered. They can't be taught. So this is where you really have to like take the time to engage and problem solve and think for yourself. And we need to sort of swap this recite, regurgitate, repeat towards the think, do, and produce.
Yeah.
And then sort of the next big one I'd say is super important is, you need challenge to change. Like, if what you're doing doesn't take you beyond your current capacity, then there's no stimulus for your brain and body to adapt to a superior level. So you see these people that do the same park run. They train 3 times a week, but they're same level of fitness 6 months later. And it's because then they're failing to optimize and align with this principle.
That's
There's
what we
no
do, yeah.
progressive overlap. Are people bench pressing 140? I'm like, I've literally been into gyms and I was like, mate, you're bench pressing 140 when I saw you last year. And look, on Instagram, at least, it looks like you're training 5 times a week. Like, what the fuck's going on?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? And it's like, okay. And then normally it's where they're breaking down and leaking progress there is they're not doing that progressive overload. So we want people in the adaptive zone in that perspective. So if it's a psychological skill, you know, they should be sat there, hands clasped. You should sort of feel your mind churn, heart pound, and you're like eyes squishing together, pupils dilating, and you can tell this. And again, when I'm going in to look at organizations or sports teams, you can just walk around and you'd be like, oh yeah, we're training. I'm like, are you? He's talking about what he's going to have for dinner. He's talking about who necked the most birds at the weekend.
Yeah.
Like, you ain't in the adaptive zone and therefore you're not getting better. So you might have spent 3 hours there, but you actually spent about 6 minutes of actual time training. So don't kid yourself. And that's when I'll look to like try and manipulate that environment or the constraints so we can take that 6 minutes to 60.
Yeah.
And get more stimulus back. And then next up is, you know, you must identify specifically where your skills are breaking down and then focus your effort there. So using the tennis analogy again, if your first serve is great and it's not a problem in matches, and your return serve's great and you're not leaking progress in matches there, but your second serve's dog shit, guess what? You should be spending your time training your second serve. And because training your first serve or your second serve isn't going to make you a better tennis player because it's not a problem on Saturday's big game sort of thing. Mm-hmm. So it's really about getting specific about, where am I actually leaking progress? Just like a biomechanist would look at someone's power clean and be like, oh, right, your glutes can't support this weight to pull through the weight there. So you're actually strong enough in this position. Okay, we need to fix that. Then you fix the chink in the armor, then it all just bum. Whereas people just do this mindless one-size-fits-all prescriptive package of, I'm going to go and do gym. And that's fine. And in fact, it's brilliant if your goal is to just be healthy, right? So please caveat that, people listening.
Yeah.
You know, if you're going to the gym to just keep fit, it's not a problem that you park run. However, you know, if you would like to, okay, yeah, I have plateaued a bit. It would be nice to keep improving these things, even if you're not a professional athlete. I mean, if you're a professional athlete, that's where I will be.
Hammering you.
Sort of, yeah, fucking hammering you.
Because it makes so much sense when you explain it.
Oh, it's the sort of shit our mum's probably told us, mate, isn't it? But it's like, it's so easy to just forget this. And mate, honestly, even at Champions League winning football clubs, you go in, I'm like, guys, like, come on. It's so easy to forget, let alone and these are people with coaches left, right and center. So
also, like, you can't always, I always ask opinions of people that I value their opinion that are not in my circle, or not even in my trade sometimes, because sometimes a fresh set of eyes is quite good as well. When you're always in something, you know, it could be a relationship, it could be a job. You start taking things for granted. You start slipping. You don't notice things as much as you would.
Yeah, multiple
generally
perspectives
speaking
are always useful, right?
Yeah,
they can see things from angles you can't.
So that's probably what, you know, when you go into a business, you're effectively seeing all those holes that those guys noticed in the first 2 years of their position.
And that's, of course, my job. And I would probably be in a similar position to them if I was there day in, day out. And I think that's sort of the role I've played in terms of sport and working in that space. But then to wrap that up, this is a key one. I think I know you and I have talked about this concept as not just in terms of development and elite performance, but in terms of society. And this is that we must create uncertainty in training, right? Now, because here's the question, right? Is it realistic to expect ourselves, people that we're leading, or society to be able to deal with all the emotion, challenge and failure that life or performance will inevitably bring if they're never exposed to it? Yeah. Like, of course it's not. It's ridiculous to think that that's possible.
Yeah.
But yet we try and, you know, school systems mollycoddling and, you know, no one's allowed to experience any negative emotion. Negative emotions are evil. Actually serve a really fucking important evolutionary purpose. But then it's just, and this is the thing.
You reminded me of that Ricky Gervais quote when he goes, how arrogant are you to think you can go through life without being offended?
Yeah. Yeah. Unfortunately, you're going to experience all the emotions under the sun, and that's part of life. And you need to be able to inoculate against them. And this is the thing, right? We should be schools, elite development programs, we should be creating safe, controlled environments where we force people to confront failure, adversity, emotion, so that we inoculate them, because they'll suddenly realize, oh, it's not that bad, you know? And then you develop this ability to cope. And that's probably one of the most important skills there is in, again, not just elite performance, but in life.
It's also like most of the time you build something up in your head that's a lot worse in your head than it is in real life, right?
Yeah.
And once you've actually done the thing or written a message or said the thing, there's a lot of weight lifted off your shoulders anyway.
Mate, like,
you know, like think of it like, you know, recently we've shut a business down, as we were talking about.
Yeah.
And sort of for 2 weeks you're like, fuck, it's really bad, it's really bad, it's really bad. And then you kind of publicly announce that this is what's happened. And you get 24 hours of import of supportive messages, and then the next day you're like, "Oh, I feel a bit lighter, feel a bit better. I feel I can cope with that a bit nicer now." And it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it was going to be.
Of course, and like, you know, I'm sure people listening have probably heard of this bias, but loss aversion bias. This is the problem, right? You know, from an evolutionary perspective, we're programmed to feel loss and failure roughly 3 times more intensely than we do feel positive emotion when there's gain.
That's interesting.
And that's because, you know, way back when, say we're our caveman ancestors, if we find an apple, okay, great. Got an apple for a day. It's good. It's a good thing. But if that saber-toothed tiger eats you, you're fucked. Do you know what I mean? It's game over. Therefore, we need to react more aggressively to and assertively to threat than we do gain. And that's why, from an evolutionary mechanism, there's this natural fear of failure, fear of loss, and we fear losing things more than we enjoy gaining things. And with that in mind, this is why the beast we create in our mind, in terms of the failure or the catastrophe, we sort of, this is going to be the end of the world. This is going to be, you know, the beast is never as bad as we think it will be. But the challenge is, it's not until you're exposed to failure that you start to realize, oh, I failed. Oh, okay, wasn't that bad. Okay, I'll give it another go. And it's not unless you're exposed to that, you start to work that out. And then you almost become immune to it. You know, like, you know, you've just given a brilliant personal example there, but it's the same for, you know, as a kid, you're hanging onto the side of the swimming pool being like, oh, I'm going to do my first whip. And you're like, oh no, if I let go, I'm going to sink and drown and die and the sharks will get me. And then you do it. And then you're like, literally 10 seconds later, like, what the fuck was I worried about? Yeah. You know, it's the same with anything, like leaving your job, first kiss, whatever. It's that natural feeling. And again,
I think it's a really important message for people that are listening that might be kind of overwhelmed with their own personal situations or what's going on in the world, if you know what I mean, to hear that and to understand that it's very natural and normal to feel like that.
Well, look, you fall over and cut your leg. What happens? You know, and of course, unless you've hit a major artery, you're not worried about, oh, I'm going to bleed out. You don't have to think, oh, I need to recover. Because you've got an immune system and it just sorts it. And just like physically, we've got an immune system, we've also got a psychological immune system. So we're exposed to like hard knocks, shit happens, and you get over it. We're not descended from weak people. Our DNA, we are hardwired to deal. The exact opposite, in fact. Those people have been bred out, unfortunately. Like,
I mean, if you actually look at it like that, life now is the easiest it's ever been.
Objectively, yeah.
Yeah. You know,
from
threats and, you know, like all that kind of stuff that we might have had 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 years ago.
Oh yeah, yeah. I'm living in paradise. You can go. Most people, you know, can go and buy a steak and have a steak on a Friday night. I mean, it's unheard of.
You're not walking down the street with your life at risk. I mean, there's still places like that, unfortunately, but
of course
we're generalising here.
Yeah, and we're particularly lucky in the UK and in Western Europe and North America. But yeah, 100%, man.
Hi guys, while I've got you, I wanted to announce an exciting new sponsor for the show. For those that know me or listen regularly, you'll know that I'm a big combat sports fan, and some of my favourite kit to use when training is by a brand called Venom. Fellow combat sports fans will know Venom as the UFC's official outfitting apparel partner. They have clothing and equipment for MMA, boxing, Muay Thai and BJJ. However, what I'm most excited about is their new lifestyle range, some of which I'll be rocking on the show. to privilege to partner with a global brand such as Venom. Will it make me a better athlete? Probably not, but at least I'll look good doing it. Right, third principle then.
Third mechanism.
Sorry.
Yeah, so third mechanism, mate. So at this point in time, right, you're pursuing your concordant goals. So you activate all this psychological firepower. You're banging in terms of responsiveness to training. You're bringing the intensity. You've aligned with that quality practice. So you're profiting from training. Yeah. So we can forget 10,000 hours. We're aiming for 3. We do that, and the product is excellence, or you're really good at what you do. But then comes crunch time, right? It's all well and good having this potential, but you need to be able to deploy it on demand under pressure. So whether that's a special forces team, someone taking a shot, that opportunity might present for 10 seconds. And if you miss it, it's gone and gone forever. Same with a derivatives trader. It might be an operation to lock in 150 grand. They miss it, gone and gone forever. Same in sport. I mean, how many more examples do we need to see of that?
Yeah.
So this is about the psychological piece in its purest element. It's that, how do we develop the psychological capacity to be able to access all our technical ability on demand and under pressure? I'm going to draw another picture quickly.
How do we? This is interesting.
Yeah, well, look. So
because I'm going to give you an example of me. Like, I can do physical stuff in training ways really, really well.
Yeah.
So I can run a marathon, not in a marathon race. I can spar with you all day. I can roll with you all day. And have no fear of it. Doesn't matter who I'm rolling with, who I'm doing what with. But the moment someone says, do you want to do this in a race environment? Do you want to do this in a competition? I can't.
Yeah. Well, look, the first answer to that question, well, there's a very clear unconscious belief you've got hardwired into your brain there in terms of the way you just went, I can't. And we'll talk about that.
Well, it's the pressure, but yeah.
But the first answer to that question comes back to mechanism 1, making sure the goal's concordant in the first place. Because if it's a concordant goal, you should really want to. A lot of people that get to that stage, it's probably because you just don't really care enough, or you're not optimized enough to go and enter that specific competition.
Yeah.
Because I've seen things you've thrown yourself at and taken huge risk for.
Yeah, true.
So I'm like, so that's the first thing, right? And the second component is, if your training has been designed properly and it's aligned with those principles we just discussed, part of the training should have been progressive exposure to training competition. And it's so obvious on an elite development program, but like, you don't just train, you're going to be exposed to competition really early. In fact, I always advise to do it super early, because if people don't want to do that, then they shouldn't be in this program, because you're here to be a competitor.
So not like when I get to this stage,
no,
let's say
once I'm a black belt and hard as fuck, then I'll have a fight. It doesn't work like that.
Yeah. So when I first started that, everyone in the gym would say exactly what you said. You need to compete straight away just to get a feel for it. Get smashed while you're a shit anyway. That's the whole point of the journey.
Inoculate yourself against some of the fears that you've perhaps got now. So that's a big part. And then thirdly, like, I guess this is where from a psychological perspective, it's probably useful to talk a little bit about how a brain works. Like, and I'm bastardizing and simplifying the science here, but in terms of your brain, so say this is your brain tie. Yeah. I'll give you a nice big one. And you got this bit at the top of your brain, like your nut here, and this is like your prefrontal cortex. So this is what we think with when we're thinking. It's like that conscious bit. So if I went 12 times 8 and I got you to get your pen and paper out and work it out, you'd be using your conscious brain to think about that. And then we've got way down at the bottom of our brainstem, like our emotional reptilian brain, which is sort of that fight or flight response. It's just that panic that sets in when we're faced with a huge threat. And then let's call this like the unconscious brain. Now, all of your skill and abilities stored in your unconscious brain as like mental structures, or what we call mental structures. They're like complex lattice works of information. And we can go in and scan someone's brain who's like for instance, a Major League Baseball pitcher. We can get him to throw a pitch, identify what part of the brain he's using, and look at his lattice work. And then we can go and do it to a high school kid. And we can see the difference, and we can compare their brains and be like, wow, novice to expert brain. Big, thick, myelinated, complex lattice work of information, and then a little scrawny like spider's web.
Yeah.
So all this training we've been talking about is designed to build these complex lattice works of information.
And you're on about physically build them. From the scan, you can see it. It's literally neurological wiring in your brain. Wow.
Yeah. Well, we can't see it, of course, when we're here. It's like, and that's what I mean. I can go in and see the equivalent of like a massive set of, a massive rig or ripped six pack. We can see this in terms of your skills and ability in your brain.
Amazing.
It's really expensive to do though, which is why it doesn't happen. Hopefully it'll get cheaper over the next 10 years or so. But what we need to do is ensure that, when elite performance is all unconscious. So if I say to you 2 times 2, 4 just comes in your head. Capital of France, Bredan, your brain just fills in the gap, right? And that's because you've got complex, sophisticated mental structures for your 2 times table, for your capital cities in Europe. Does that make sense? So there's no thinking, no effort, flows out of you. And that's exactly what happens when you're watching Cristiano Ronaldo play football or, a top musician perform live. It just flows out of them. There's no thinking. There's not much effort. There's no time to think in elite performance. You just have to react.
I always think of the analogy of driving a car, right? Kid runs out, you brake. You don't even know you're braking.
Yeah. Your unconscious mind takes over.
Bang.
Done.
But is that not so, just to be devil's advocate, does that not go back to the whole repetition piece and the 10,000 hours piece? And if you do it, we train so much of the same drills over and over and over in life so that when it happens under pressure and under load and, in an environment that it just comes.
It comes back. Part of it's training, but it's not 10,000 hours.
Got you.
It's training under the conditions that accurately reflect the reality of the challenges you're going to be exposed to. So you can you can go to the gym for 10,000 hours, but that doesn't mean you're again, it's the richness of those hours. And if you're doing it properly, then it really shouldn't take 10,000. 10,000 hours will just insinuate you turn up, you work hard, you go home.
I guess
you need to be training the right thing.
If we put it into boxing, if you went and hit pads for 10,000 hours, you'd look fucking good on the pads, potentially. Yeah. But the moment you go into spar with someone you've never sparred.
Yeah, exactly.
You can't do it.
And that's why, exactly. And if you do get to a certain level where you're winning, okay, I'm at ABAs, I'm winning. But then I go up another level because I'm pushed out my comfort zone, back into the adaptive zone. Oh, then I get clocked here. Then I work out, okay, where I'm leaking progress is this. I now need to address that. So it's conscious, intentional intervention, not just mindless repetition for 10,000 hours. I'm just going to go and jog every day for 10,000 hours.
Got you.
You ain't going to win a gold medal doing that. And at a point, you'll just stop. And the last 8,000 hours, you'll just be doing that park run and getting the same time every week.
Plateau.
Yeah. So let me introduce you to a tool that I think really illustrates what we're looking for when it comes to performing under pressure. And in particular, that how do we make sure we access what we're capable of? So if you imagine this is what I'd describe as performance barometer. And across the horizontal axis, we got the quality of emotions. So over here, we've got negative.
Yeah.
And over here, positive.
Yeah.
So feel good, feel shit. Okay. On the vertical axis, we got your output of attention and energy. So how high output, high energy, and laser focus. So think charged fire hose to the face.
Yeah.
Bang.
Yeah.
And then at the bottom.
Ouch. Yeah.
Ouchie, yeah. And then at the bottom, we've got little trickle, broad, just wide. No, you're not expending much energy and it's not really going anywhere.
Floating about in the abyss.
Yeah. Well, yeah. And then
high energy.
High and low.
Yeah.
So when it comes time to train and compete, where you want to be is bang, top right. I want you putting out on high energy.
And positive.
High attention, feeling positive. So I've heard people describe this as one guy described it as I feel like a god when I'm in there, And again, from an evolutionary perspective, this is like what we call as a flow state.
Mike Tyson used to say that as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is where you gain total access to all your skills that are stored in your brain as those complex mental structures.
Yeah.
Our frontal brain here, emotional brain here, all your skills are stored in your unconscious as these complex lattice works of information here. And what we got here is a critical faculty barrier.
Yeah.
The critical faculty barrier in your brain opens up and you express all your ability that exists within you when you're in this zone. What happens though is from time to time, we perceive threat. And whenever we perceive threat, we're shunted into here. So we still have a high output of energy and attention, but now we feel negative. So frustrated, angry, pissed off, anxious.
That's where the doubt is, right?
Yeah. And then what happens is our blood flow and oxygen is diverted to our emotional brain here, and it triggers this fight or flight response. And the big problem from a performance perspective is that you literally become a novice again because the critical faculty barrier closes and you just lose access to your technical skill and ability that you've spent 10 years training. And now again, if your training's been designed properly, you should have been inoculated against this, okay, by being progressively exposed to it. But So when you see Rory McIlroy choke on the 18th hole, he's not suddenly got shit at golf or forgot how to do it. When you see Harry Kane send a penalty, not even hitting the target, it's not because Harry Kane's forgotten how to take penalties. It's because he's assessed the situation through his senses. He's perceived some threat. Oh, look at the cameras. Oh, look at the crowd. Maybe a thought's crept in. Oh, if I miss this, I'm fucking going to be ridiculed on social. And obviously, I can't speak for Harry Kane, but these are sort of things that you can think and perceive. And then suddenly, your perception of my capacity to deal with the demand that's been imposed on me, World Cup penalty against France, has shunted. And now I've made the event bigger than me and I perceive threat. And it sends you in here, you block your critical faculty barrier and you lose access to all your skill and you choke.
Fuck.
And in here you're activating 3 different
Seems
hormones.
so obvious when you draw it and explain it like that. I've been in these positions.
Yeah. I think we all have. No one gets to avoid this, right? The way your mind...
Even not in sports though, even in like giving a presentation, in a business meeting, you've prepared, you've done it a million times. I said to you earlier, you've got default answers to stuff, right? If you've done stuff for long enough. That's similar to what you're saying within sport.
Yeah.
That's my default
your mental
answers.
structure. If your default answer is just a mental structure.
Yeah,
and
if
it
I'm
just
put
flows
under
out
pressure with a certain question about something, because I've done it for 10 years or however long, I've got a default answer. But sometimes I get into a position where I'm ready to give the answer, but the answer just won't come to my brain.
Yeah. And that's why it's really important to try and recreate those scenarios in training, which is, of course, hard. But yeah, absolutely.
Super interesting.
You don't have the ability to control it. So this is where it links to perceptions, right? And let's talk a little bit about how your brain works. So again, we're back to your brain. From a sensory perspective, your brain's taking in 3 million bits of information per second. So right now, your sight, your 5 senses, sight, sound, hearing, taste, you're taking in 3 million bits of information per second, right? And so from a processing capacity, your brain can deal with around 134 bits of information. So your brain has these series of filters that filter those 2 million pieces of information a second down into those 134 bits of information. And it does so based on trying to serve you, based on what your goals are, based on who you are, what you're about.
Like an algorithm.
It is, mate, we're just a bunch of sloppy wet code. I'm not joking. We're just a bunch of sloppy wet code. And then we spit out in the terms of thoughts, actions and feelings. Your unconscious mind will present that to your conscious and it will dictate how you feel, how you act and how you want to behave based on what it perceives is optimal around the way around it. And this is why I can walk in a room and I might be like, oh, cool. Is that the gym over there? I'm going to notice things that are relevant to me. You might walk in and see like, oh, look, your background, hospitality. You might notice, oh, I love the way they've done that. Our brain, we're in the same environment, but we're noticing completely different things, getting completely different feelings, right? And even in two athletes competing in the same match can recall it in different ways because their filters are set differently.
Does that filter determine what you store as well and don't store?
Yes.
Or do we store everything?
No. So what will happen is when you
do you know what I mean?
Yeah, and it's a really good question because memories form one of the filters. So your memories will encode it into you, and some are encoded harder than others. So an example would be, I'm walking along the street and I'm 6 years old and a dog comes up and bites me. Now, in order to preserve myself, my brain, which is genius, will code onto my sloppy wet code. Dogs are bad, watch out, they bite you, they're a threat. And it's coded into you to like, feel dogs, threat, get out the situation, move. And this is what can create phobias. So our reactions in the present aren't reactions to the present. They're reactions to our historic memories.
Okay.
So this is how we get phobias. So then the next time you see a dog, you're like, dogs are bad, dogs are evil, bang. And people do this in partners. Men are evil, women are this, based on one experience. And this is the problem, right? The reality is we're partly conscious. We're partly conscious of dogs based on our own unique experience. We're not fully conscious of what dogs are. Because dogs are evil, dogs are amazing, dogs are kind, dogs can be dangerous, dogs can be your best friend. They're all these things. But your coding is based on your unique experience. And this is where we make these huge judgments about things and they'll dictate how we act and behave in the future. So in terms of these filters, memories is a huge one that we need to optimize. And memories is one, and personality type is one. Training from skill, those mental structures will form one. If you're trained to perceive and notice certain things. But then another one, and probably almost most important one, is your beliefs and your perceptions. So, we were talking earlier and you said about competing, you said, I can't. It was a very unconscious reaction. When it's unconscious, that's revealing to me how you're coded. And when I'm talking to an athlete, I'm working one-to-one, I'm going to have a really blind conversation.
I've said I can't to the wrong guy here.
Yeah. So we're going to pin you against the wall and work out how but this is where we'll be like, okay, there's a bug in the code there and we need to address that, because otherwise that coding will dictate how you behave in relation to that belief around that. But this is the biggest one that sort of fucks people, to be honest. And I describe it as like the perceptions of their own potential. So we talked about this idea of like putting things on pedestals. So when you look up to things, like if I put the World Cup on a pedestal, or I put the girl or the partner on the pedestal, what happens is we immediately, from a filtering perspective, we're perceiving that, okay, they're above me. So therefore we almost have this instant fear of loss of that which we seek to obtain, because we think that, well, when I have that, that will solve all my problems. Yeah. We're partly conscious. Like, no, it won't. It never works like that. There's just as many drawbacks to winning a World Cup as there are to losing a World Cup. There's an equal amount of positives and negatives in anything you're going to experience. And, I had a good conversation recently with Sir Clive Woodward, who was talking about this with England rugby. And he was saying the worst thing that ever happened to English rugby was winning the World Cup in 2003. Just like almost, I believe, one of the worst things that ever happened to England football was winning the World Cup in 1966.
Why?
Because it put this fear of loss in the whole nation ever since. The expectation that everyone puts on that team, the media, the public, is that if you don't win a World Cup from now as a World Cup winner, you're a failure. So England have failed every single World Cup. England, the only way England can win and come out of a World Cup with like credibility is if they win it. And that's why the press, media project all this anxiety or fear of loss onto them. And it basically pings them into this redhead state. And that's the product of that, of course, is you get players being like, I don't want to take the penalty. I don't want to be the scapegoat. I don't want to get the abuse. I don't want to, and they're playing with the fear of loss. They're not playing to go and win from a psychological perspective. I'm making big assumptions now, and I'm talking hypothetically.
No, of course, makes sense.
But what I'm saying is that the players are going to this World Cup with a fear that their aim is to don't lose. Is not to go express myself at the highest level as a footballer. I mean, anyone that's watched that team, and I think in cross sports, England and rugby and football, do you think that they're really playing the most expressive and the goal is to like play at the highest level in terms of their ability and creativity as a team? It's go, don't lose, don't look shit.
Almost eggshelly.
Yeah. And so many of us do this. I'm just using that example as a metaphor for other areas of our lives where, there's so many areas we go and we play to not lose. And, I think there's loads of examples in relationships where you've got that dream partner and you're like, oh, I just don't, just don't want to lose it. Or you put them on a pedestal, be like, oh, they're amazing. They're this, they're that, they're that. And then obviously 3 months later, you're like, what the fuck have I got myself into? And it's this filtering thing.
I wanted to ask you something about, I don't know if you've noticed it with like athletes or the elite people you work with, this like imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
We spoke about earlier. How does that work? Why do we get that feeling?
Yeah. Well, look, it's basically very similar to what we're talking about here because it stems from this perception. There's something in the environment because it's a natural feeling to have, right? If you not just for elite performance, but life, you're going to experience every emotion under the sun. And one of them you could describe as, say, imposter syndrome.
Where you don't feel like you belong.
Yeah. It's a natural feeling to have, I think, through periods of your life. But where it will stem from is a perception. Something happens in your environment, and then ultimately your coding has identified, oh, that's bigger than you or more than you, and you shouldn't be here.
Yeah.
And what it does is it sends you into that redhead state. And the risk is, of course, that it can cause you to choke by the effect we've just talked about and described. So really, again, it links back to this coding. And that's why it's really important because here's the key thing here. When we're talking about perceptions of your capacity or capability versus perceptions of your demands or what's required from you in the environment. But these are perceptions, it's not reality.
Got you.
So there's certain things that you're picking up from a sensory perspective, and you're focusing on the things that might be suggestive of, okay, maybe because there probably are like everyone's an imposter to an extent, but also everyone's not an imposter.
Mm-hmm.
And depending on what you focus on, and is going to dictate how you feel in that respect. And like the key thing in terms of understanding how your brain works and taking time to reflect on things where you have had feelings, thoughts, and behaviors, and engaged in behaviors that you think are suboptimal.
Yeah.
Is that they're cues to point to where you can optimize things and challenge things. And of course, from a psychological perspective, I don't do a lot of one-to-one work, but that this is the sledgehammer work I might do one-to-one with an athlete or performer in terms of identifying these coders and code away some of these glitches. But there's this saying, and I'm sure you've heard it, like, as within, so without. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Right? And like the universe, like if you smile into the mirror will smile back at you. And if you frown into the mirror, the universe will frown back at you, or the mirror will frown back at you. And it's kind of how this works, because your unconscious coding and wiring is the smile or frown that you're putting out into the world, and you will be shown back what's going on deep down.
You got to feed it what you want.
Repeat.
You got to effectively feed it what you want more of.
Yeah. And sometimes you need to behave to become. So, because here's the thing, right, with anyone, everything you can be is already a fact. Mm. What dictates whether you realize, in terms of alternate futures, if you're here and you have all this possibility upside and downside, where you ultimately end up is going to be based upon the behaviors that you exhibit in the world. Mm-hmm. And you have control of that.
Yeah.
And when you start to behave, where there's this misconception in elite performance that, okay, when I'm motivated, when I'm confident, then I'll compete, or then I'll do, or then I'll engage in that behavior. Then I'll behave like this in the relationship. It's like, no, you have to behave to become, because thoughts and coding follows action. It's not the other way around.
That's deep, big man. That is deep. The behave to become thing, especially in relationship, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm not far from a relationship expert, but yeah, a relationship in any, whether it's a business relationship, a personal relationship, but
you're kind of I guess it's a different way of saying the proof's in the pudding, right? So you can talk the talk all you want, but you have to
do it.
You have to walk the walk.
If you look at model behavior of people who are perceived as culturally elite, I've used the example of the likes of, in sport, there's some obvious examples, your Cristiano Ronaldo's, your Serena Williams. Look at their behavior. It's not surprising that they've produced the results they have. Look at Ronaldo's career and Rooney's career. Rooney's had an incredible career. But, you could argue he had more potential to excel than Ronaldo. But the mindset and the behaviors that Ronaldo's brought are more conducive to a prolonged career at the elite level. And that can be the difference between winning 6, 7 Ballon d'Ors and not. Yeah. But still being incredibly elite, of course.
Yeah, I always think
that as an extreme example.
I always think of Floyd Mayweather in that sense.
Oh, wow,
he always stayed a few weeks out of fighting weight, always trained, who's never kind of off camp as such. And then you'd see someone like Ricky Hatton, who'd be in the pub on the beers between fights and put on a load of weight and then lose a load of weight.
Yeah, exactly. And he's not putting himself under the conditions that will get the best out of him. Mm. So he's almost, we probably saw in terms of what a Ricky Hatton, what an incredible fighter. By
exactly, yeah.
But we probably saw 70% of what he was actually capable of. Yeah. And that's fine. Maybe that wasn't his goal. He seems like a happy guy with a great family. And that's amazing. It's not all about winning. But I'm just saying this in respect to people whose goal is to excel at something or is to get the most out of them. And that might be as a parent. It might not be to win a gold medal. It might be to be a world-class dad or whatever. But what behaviors do you need to engage in? Because it will start to correct the code and confront things. And then, of course... And these are the 3 skills that we need to develop from a psychological perspective. 1, bang, we call it flicking the switch. So we need to access when it's time to compete, perform, bang, we need to flick the switch on, deliver all our capability. And then 2, we need to develop that control switch so that when life inevitably kicks us in the nuts, okay, how do we regain control and bounce back? And then thirdly, you spend too long in here, and of course you end up bottom left. So now you've got no energy, you're feeling negative, you can't perform in here. This is where it becomes pathological. Like you're clinically depressed. You've got anxiety. You've got chronic fatigue syndrome. Like you're ill and it's burnout. But through reversing the conditions that sent you there, you can recover. But then this comes to the third crucial skill that everyone that excels at the absolute pinnacle has, is the other side of competing and training is rest and recovery. So when your stimulus to adapt to a higher level, you put that stimulus on or expose it in training, in competition, but the actual growth occurs in what we call the recovery zone. So from a physical perspective, that's sleep. From a cognitive perspective, that might be switching off completely on the emotional and mental level, which is why you'll see this creative insight off this burst of inspiration. You'll sort of look at a problem and analyze and use a lot of conscious effort and loading, but then you'll go and have a shower or go for a jog, and then bang, you have that eureka moment.
That makes sense.
This is why it's so important to periodically and structure your rest and recovery as seriously as you structure your training and competition. And again, the whole different hormonal profile in your brain and body, all the sex hormones, some of the oxytocin, serotonin, dopamine, all the feel-good stuff. This is that rest and recovery, and it's so important and underestimated by many people in terms of structuring that. Like, I mean, when was the last time you structured something purely for the sake of recovering and switching off? Or is that something you're good at?
So, ever since I've had the Whoop, I've been more conscious of the sleep part of that whole thing. So, like last night again, I'll turn something off halfway through now. We'll go up to bed because I'm thinking I do really want to try and get 7 hours if I can, because historically I've chronically not slept as much as I needed to. But probably not enough mentally. So my issue is I'll take my fucking magnesium, I'll take my electrolyte, I'll eat the right slow release protein before bed, I'll go to bed at the right time. My issue is most of the time I'm a chronic overthinker. So it's mentally I can't switch off. What I really struggle with is to find stillness. So I have to like super meditate on that, if you know what I mean. I have to like sit in a room or whatever I got to do. Sometimes going for a run, which is what I really enjoy. Sometimes being in pain. Like recently, there was a lot going on, and it was, I can't remember when it was, December, January, whenever it was, and I went and sat in the sea for ages. Because in my eyes, and when someone said, what are you doing? And I was like, look, I feel like I need to suffer a little bit because I can't switch it off. And to switch it off, I need some pain, so much that I can't think about anything else but that pain. And that's what the sea gave me that day. So, when you went and did 10 minutes in there, I was in such an uncomfortable position, the cold. I hadn't done it for a few months, that I couldn't think of anything else. I had to be kind of present and concentrate on my breathing and just be here. And that gave me that kind of, sounds a bit weird, but I needed to suffer. You know what I mean?
Yeah, and I totally get that, and I think for people that do have a tendency to overthink, and I'm a chronic overthinker. I can relate to that perfectly. And this is the thing, right? So I talk about this as like a green zone, this ability to switch off mentally and emotionally. It's so individually specific. So for some people, it is great to just go and sit in quiet. For other people, if you're an overthinker, it's the worst thing in the world, because all you're going to do is your thoughts will be all over the place. And this is where recovery for the people like yourself, and I'd probably put myself in that category, is like being active with something. Something that engages your mind, that's playful. So this is where like sport could be good, like playing tennis, going to the gym, because we do that and we train hard, but like it's kind of like competitive and it's kind of blue head type stuff. Whereas playing tennis or playing a board game or watching something engaging occupies your attention so that you do switch off from everything else that's going on.
I would agree with you. So like the whole thing with the club last week, people are like, how you feeling? But I was so occupied. I was a million miles an hour doing what I had to do and keeping myself occupied that I wasn't feeling.
And where's the emotional intensity from the realization that had?
That was probably, if I'm honest, way before the actual point of when the public hear about something, right?
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? So you've almost got time to process it. So let's say, we've shut 2 weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, we spent a week kind of taking out the valuables and doing all the kind of nitty gritty and letting companies know. Then we've had a week of normal life with it shut, and then we've publicly announced it. And now we've got a week of the stuff that comes with that, the onslaught, the keyboard warriors, the good, the bad, the ugly. But actually, we've kind of processed it for 3 weeks before we publicly put it out. And we're fortunate enough that we could control that narrative. But sometimes you can't, right? Like that penalty example.
Yeah.
He hasn't got time to go away now, spend a week with his wife, his family, his therapist, his head coach.
Let's train for this penalty.
Let's train that we're going to miss it and what's going to come from it.
Yeah, of course.
He hasn't had that time. It's like,
Didn't even know he was going to take one, though.
Of course.
And that's why it must be factored into that uncertainty element again.
The resilience piece that you were talking about, we need to be put into those positions to kind of strengthen the mind. Yeah. Now, I'm going to ask you something. You obviously have this wealth of knowledge on how the nut works. That's my technical way of term.
Yeah.
I mean, how good are you at applying this stuff to your own life?
I think I'm almost 80-20, if I'm honest. I think...
in which way?
Good.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good.
Yeah. I have to say that here, don't I?
No. I just think of myself. Most people ring me for advice as their friend. Life advice, whatever. I've generally got quite an older head on my shoulders. I'm quite sensible. I can make pragmatic decisions without letting emotion get in the way. Yeah, I guess another strength. But I can't always look in the mirror and tell myself the same shit.
Yeah. Well, look, in that respect, in terms of applying these principles, like personally, like there's loads of people I work with to help me optimize this. Like in terms of the concordance piece, I think I'm good at that because that's something that once you do the reflection on, you can do that quite intensely for a period of time. And then you're kind of like, okay, like you said, values might change, but you're relatively consistent. In terms of training, mate, I have a coach for everything I do.
Do you?
Yeah, strength and conditioning, rehab. You see my rehab team, it's pathetic, mate. You think I'm an absolute princess. But like, because I want to optimize everything I can, there's obviously a tipping point where that gets ridiculous. But yeah, like and by virtue of working in this space, I've been privileged to meet, top nutritionists, top psychologists that work in specialist areas. And yeah, of course, I'll notice, what I'm good at is that I can, of course, by virtue of what I've studied and my expertise in the area, I can become aware, okay, there's something, okay, this is becoming a bit of a pattern. And then I know who to speak to help work that out.
Yeah.
But this is the thing, right? Like, we have been gifted with the equipment. Like, the whole purpose of emotions is to identify and to trigger that and guide us along our path of maximal development. So for instance, when you feel angry or frustration, it's because someone's confronting the message there from an evolutionary perspective is someone's, you've got boundaries and someone's violated them. Or you've got a certain standard of how you should be treated and someone's violated that. Same with like, if you feel sadness, you've lost something that was important to you. So, and anxiety or fear is, look, you perceive that there's something in your environment that's a threat to you that you're not prepared to deal with. You perceive it's bigger than you are.
Yeah.
So this is where you can, and then once you can develop a few skills to try and, bridge that gap. And that could be a simple check-in that like, right, so whenever I go in redhead, okay, first thing is become aware. Second thing is like, okay, I know that I always overestimate things. It's the human brain. I've got a 3-to-1 ratio here that's screwing me a bit. Okay, first thing to do is like, hit mute. Don't say anything now because I'm in redhead. I'm going to say something stupid or do something stupid. I'm just going to shut up. Then it might be like, right, I'm going to try and control my arousal. And this is where you can enter into some, go for a workout, go for a walk, have a vent with someone, do all these different bits and pieces, a meditation, emotional control training on some of these apps. But then it's like you can bring some logic back to the party. Like, have I been confronted with something like this before? Yeah. Okay. Did I get through it? Yeah. Okay. So what will be the benefit for you flapping about this for the next week? Probably none. Who solved this problem? Am I the first person to have this problem? No, probably not. Okay. Sometimes it's not how, but who, right? How do I speak to them? Okay. What would I do could I just work 48 hours to get rid of this problem non-stop? And it's just going through some of these processes that can help really mitigate that stress response.
There's something that comes to mind that I read somewhere, and I use it a lot now. I say it a lot to my friends if they're ever struggling. And I even say it to myself, and it's like, if you think of how many years you've been alive?
38.
38 years you've been living. And along those 38 years, how many times have you thought that something that had gone wrong was the worst thing that happened to you, was the end of life? It could never get better. Things could never go back to normal. It would never be the same again. And you've got through all of them. Yeah. And you're sat here now chatting to me.
100%.
So all those things we've been afraid of, we've got through to get to this day we're sat in now. So actually, all these things that are ahead of us are going to be no different. It feels really, it feels really bad now. Your emotions are heightened.
Well, if you take the right mindset, it should only get easier.
Yeah.
Because you should enhance your ability to.
Once the emotion's out of the way,
yeah,
the actual thing wasn't even that important, the thing you're upset about.
And the key thing is, there's no problem that doesn't have a solution. Otherwise, by definition, it's not a problem. Like, so a lot of it's, do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
so to an extent, it's like, you're not the first, you won't be the last. And, you know, you can speak to you right now about what's happened. You're not the first, you're not the last.
No.
And
it's not even it's not even the first or last time it's going to happen to me.
No.
It's happened before and it'll happen again.
No.
I want it to happen again.
Yeah.
Because it wouldn't be life without a challenge.
Look, I think even at a global level, like, we think these things happen and we're like, oh my God, can you believe it? And we've gone from like, I just remember looking at a top level from like globally, like going from like Brexit to Trump to then like COVID to then we thought COVID was bad. Then we see Russia invading Ukraine. And it's like, oh my God, like changes. The only thing that's constant is change in that respect and challenge.
I feel like we always need some crisis as well, something like, and if we can't, we default to climate change. As humans, it's true though, humans, we always need something really extremely bad happening in the world that we can talk about.
And this is the problem with the media in that respect, right? And it can cause us to come out of balance and become, we're not fully conscious again, we're focusing, we've got this negativity bias because things like the media, because of that loss aversion bias, there's a 21-to-1 ratio of news reports negative to positive. So every 22 stories, 21 will be someone was raped, someone was murdered,
I'd believe that.
Immigration problem, the environment, the world's going to end, war. And then there'll be one like, oh, we won a gold medal in so-and-so, or something that's positive, or a new breakthrough in something. And this primes our brain to look for the shit in things. It affects those filters in terms of how we perceive the world around us. And this is why one of dozens of little productivity hacks, the gratitude diary is a great one. Just focusing on positive here and there is a good thing to do. What is going great?
If let me ask you something, bro. And we spoke about this a little bit offline, and you couldn't think of anyone, but I'm going to ask you anyway. If you could pick a single role model for someone who applies everything you stand for currently out there, who would it be?
Yeah, it's a tough question, and I think it's easy to default to sport.
Elite performer.
But who I would have said, who sadly passed away, was Kobe Bryant.
Okay.
As athletes go, I don't think when I listen to his interviews and engagement, he sounds to me like he's studied performance science.
Really?
Yeah. He hasn't. He's obviously performed at the absolute tip of the spear in what he's done. But I think the wisdom with which he speaks from a psychological perspective, and how when he talks about, he's clearly just so aligned with all these principles that we've sort of touched on today. And I think there's a few handful of athletes that jump out there. Of course, your Roger Federers, Tom Brady, Ronaldo.
Do you think with these guys, we as the public sat at home, watch these guys, and just it feels like everything they do is fucking perfect and they can't get it wrong, Ronaldo, all these kind of people. Yeah. Do you just think that either by default or on purpose, somewhere along the line, they've ticked all of these things we've just spent a couple of hours talking about, from strengths to interests to values to this to that. It's all aligned.
Yeah. And some by chance, right?
That's what I'm saying.
Yeah. So there's an element of chance.
Because Ronaldo grew up on the streets of knows where, it's not like he's had academy training when he was playing football.
Well, he was at Lisbon Academy from 11.
Okay.
Yeah. But also Ronaldo was like, the conditions were perfect for him for training, because he was probably, he wasn't good at school. Mm-hmm. He's didn't have the best upbringing in terms of so he didn't go to school. So immediately there, he's training more than other people at his age.
And I watched on his show that
if he was at a private school in England, he wouldn't be Cristiano Ronaldo.
No.
Do you know what I mean? And this is an
He'd
example.
wear tweed.
Yeah, he'd be wearing tweed, and maybe a winger, played rugby for Bath for a couple of years or something. Do you know what I mean? So it's like sometimes you get what you need to get to move you to the next level.
I remember watching on his documentary, his mum was adamant to make him a footballer, wasn't she? She'd feed him stuff and make him do stuff from a really young age. Yeah. Almost kind of nurturing him ready for that role.
Yeah, so he's exposed to some of these conditions. He spent more time under the conditions we talked about in terms of converting that potential and talent into tangible hardware.
Yeah.
And then, of course, he's if you profile Ronaldo from a psychological perspective, there's a trait you can screen for on personality tests in terms of industriousness. And I imagine he would be at the extreme end of that. But that's effectively your work rate. There's at the Lisbon Academy, I know he used to break into the gym. They had to bolt and padlock the gym because he kept waking up at 2 a.m. to go and do extra sessions.
What?
He wanted to get ahead of everyone else. Yeah. Everyone would go to sleep.
Oh, so he's obsessed.
And then he would wake up and he'd go and be like, I want to get an extra session in. And that's his mindset. Again, he was so concordant from a values perspective. It's that sort of intensity. Again, like Elon Musk, the amount of risk he's taken. He's so concordant with his goals. And he's so like, God designed me to do this. I have to do this. He put all his personal wealth. You could say that's reckless.
Some of these athletes, so Conor McGregor being one, he talks about it openly. In the pursuit to master his craft, he's lost his mind, right? And it's a quote from Vincent van Gogh or Van Gogh, I don't know how you pronounce it. You know, because he's trying so hard to master his craft, he ends up losing his mind in the process.
Yeah, and that's his perspective on it. I would say he loses his mind because he didn't get enough green zone, and he started to, or the way he was switching off was like, I noticed the difference. I was head over heels with Conor McGregor when he burst onto the scene. But from a performance perspective, it was quite clear that, and this is so common, right? Because once you've built excellence, you've experienced it, the hardest thing is to maintain it. I mean, there's so many one-hit wonders. Like how many teams have won back-to-back World Cups or back-to-back Champions Leagues? It's few and far between. Defending titles is hard, and that's because these biases creep in. The illusion of continuity. We think that, okay, well, because yesterday was like that, tomorrow will be like that. And we sort of think, well, I'm at the top, so great.
Yeah,
and then there's that illusion of personal control. As soon as you get to the top, everyone will tell you, oh, Ty, I knew you'd get through this. You're a genius, mate. This was always part of your... Everyone gets the same bullshit story from the media and their family and friends. And the danger is they start to believe it. I think we've seen that with people like AJ. He's probably not had people that are really challenging him, putting into the adaptive zone. When you listen to the corner of that fight against multiple, and it sounds like a lot like yes men syndrome.
Yeah.
And I feel like he's leaked some progress there.
We said before, didn't we? Like you put your foot on the gas to get to number one.
Yeah.
But when you get to number one, a lot of people then flick on the cruise control.
Yeah. Is there like I sort of describe
you can't stay there.
Yeah. I sort of describe it as this post-summit peril. Like you get to the top of the mountain, you get your selfie and photo, and you're like, oh, I've done it. And most people die on the way down. And this is because you start to switch off, you start to cut corners. Do you think Conor McGregor would have been drinking at press conferences before he won his world title?
No way.
Yeah, but he's turning up to fight Khabib with his whiskey. His values changed, and he didn't have people, I don't think, probably, I don't know, but it sounds like, or it feels like watching it from, again, at 30,000 feet, it sounds like, he didn't have people keeping him in check and reminding him of who he is, what he's about, and what his standards were that got him to where he was. And then you chuck alcohol in, and, that's a recipe for disaster with anyone, I think, in terms of...
Especially athletes.
Yeah.
Like I think if I have a glass of wine tonight, which I very rarely drink, very, very rarely drink, which is ironic for what I do for a living. But, if I could have ran today, had all my vitamins, perfect food, everything's perfect, green recovery zone, have one glass of wine, I'd have 1% recovery tomorrow on the whoop.
It's brutal, isn't it?
Like, what the fuck? Then I think, like, imagine if this fucking thing was out when I was out in IB for partying 18 to 25. Yeah. Like heavy partying, not sleep for 2 days.
Yeah.
I can only imagine what it would... I don't know. I don't even know if it's got the data for it. Yeah, because if you're getting -1 after 2 beers, what are you going to get after a sesh?
Wouldn't it? Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Bro, if people want to get hold of you, what's your social media handle? If they want to...
Social media handle, Instagram at James A. King _ Twitter at James A. King.
Showing your age there. Yeah, carry on.
Yeah.
It's X now, isn't it?
Intellect, mate.
X. It's not even Twitter.
Oh, X now. Sorry. Yeah. Of course. LinkedIn, Accelerating Excellence.
Is there a website or anything?
Yeah, jamesaking.com.
Jamesaking.com. And obviously the book they can get anywhere. What's next, bro? What's next for you?
So I'm involved in some exciting projects, but I guess, Magic Wand for me, I would... We've talked about it today, but I want to work on this democratizing access to this information. Mm-hmm. I want to make it accessible, easier to use, so people can get out there and start putting it to work for themselves and the people they care for, manage and lead. Yeah. Personally, I've got some big ambitions in sport. I'd love the idea of buying a sports team at some point,
Sick.
A group of people, and doing it properly, because I still feel like I get incredibly frustrated.
Hit me up when you're ready for that.
Yeah, we'll do it. And then... man, just to continue to apply these principles myself and see where they take me. Yeah. Just win the day, mate.
I love
Perform from a sweet spot, engage in the right type of practice, and win the day.
If I had enough dough, mate, I would just pay you to just be with me 12 hours a day. You know, like these kind of like nut coaches you get. You see it in Billions. You know, the geezer has the woman with
Wendy.
him.
Yeah.
Just to check him.
Yeah.
Because we all get a little bit, like I normally get a lot of that checking from my dad. I go and have a little chat with him and he puts me in my place. Because otherwise you do end up as time changes with a chamber of, an echo chamber, don't you? Of the yes men and yes people. And you really want your people to challenge you. But
yeah, and you can do that though. You can carve out those people you need. Like, I think of it like you need a mentor, someone who's done what you're trying to do. You need an ass kicker, someone who's just going to be brutal and tell you the truth and facts. And then you need a coach, someone who's going to like, okay, think about this, listen, and like feedback and what you're hearing. And then you need a friend, right? You need someone, a cheerleader, someone's going to be like, come on, Ty, you can do it.
Yeah, and also just to be there to listen sometimes, right?
Yeah, of course. And we've all got them somewhere, but it's about, I think when you understand these models and like, okay, this is what people have excelled have had. How do I just move this way along the continuum?
Mate, it's been so interesting.
I appreciate I've just ranted on.
But, no. And obviously, like you got such a positive energy. Like we're only getting to know each other a bit better recently, but anytime I've sent you something that was a little bit down and out on WhatsApp, the reply has always been like very uplifting, very positive. And I listen to it, I read, and I think, fucking, he's right. I am a fucking winner. You know?
Well, this is the thing, though. But like, I think anyone.
So I love that energy.
Anyone that knows this and understands these, because this isn't James King's witch doctor approach to elite performance. This is hard science.
Yeah.
And this is like, if you know this, then how can you not be positive and optimistic about stuff? People should be positive. They should be optimistic. They're like. You're like a lump of stone, and your job is to carve away at that stone strategically with effort, an offensive spirit to reveal the masterpiece. Because there's a masterpiece that everyone's got it there, and you know, if people are sat there thinking that doing nothing is the easiest option, you know, they're wrong. Like, and that's only because all the pain for taking that approach is in the future. The next significant thing I think that impacted me was an experience I had with the military. And long and short is I was on an arduous, austere selection course, and I was on a penultimate week, and it was the penultimate night of the penultimate week, and we were presented with this challenge, and I thought it was just fucking ridiculous. I thought what was being asked of us was impossible and probably a bit dangerous. And in my head, I'd sort of written myself off. I was like, there's no way I'm getting through that. And then fast forward, 36 hours, and I managed to get through it. And it was in that moment that I learned this really powerful lesson, because I think we all see a lot of these like quotes on Instagram and online. We're sent these memes, and the one that resonates in this situation is that classic, when you think you're fucked, you're probably only 40% fucked. And I hadn't just seen this stuff, I'd studied it. Yeah. I've studied how beliefs impact your perceptions of potential, but it's not until I'd experienced that I completely reset my expectations in terms of, all right, where else am I maybe making decisions like that? So that was a really meaningful experience for me. And then the last, I think, significant thing in terms of that like origin journey you talked about was through luck and hard work, I guess, I got a meeting with a guy, ex-Goldman Sachs super trader. He's like one of these guys that sat down and generated hundreds of millions like, consistently over years for Goldman Sachs. And we met for dinner at Nobu. He'd left, he'd set up his own trading house, and he was like, I want to do it better. It's not done as well as it could be. I want to set up my own trading house and make it world-class. You're a performance scientist guy, like how would you look at this? And we're sat there in Nobu, and I'm just like riffing for hours on all these, okay, we could do this in terms of identifying talent. And this is a key thing with him actually that I think is a really important point. He actually had the humility to reflect and understand that like, okay, he's an expert when it comes to trading, but he's not an expert when it comes to identifying talent, developing talent, maximizing motivation and psychological firepower in a team, shifting standards to new levels. And of course, that's what I'd studied and spent a lot of time working in, but hadn't yet delivered. And long and short is he gave me an opportunity to do that. And that was a funny dinner, by the way, because, mate, well, I'm at Nobu and I'm just like, wow, this is nice. I'm looking at the menu and And he's like ordering these bottles of wine, and I'm looking at the price. I'm just sat there thinking, I really fucking hope he splits this bill. He doesn't split this bill.
I've been in those positions.
Yeah,
in those sort of places.
Mate, and even, this is embarrassing to say, but even I tried and used the chopsticks, mate, and he literally went to me, went, do you want a fork? And I was just like, oh no, this is going terrible. But yeah, anyway, long and short, we like built that rapport, and he like, to his credit, and this is where I've been so lucky, and we need that opportunity to compete in our relative crafts. He gave me the keys. He was like, everything you've talked about, just do it. And like flash forward 3 years, it was a bit of a success story. Like he's on a beach in Singapore, chilling out, and we've gone from sort of zero to we were trading more barrels of oil a day than Glencore, Shell, and BP. And I was sort of acting CEO, managing and leading this team of incredible individuals who, from my perspective, all the guys I'm working with and I'm still privileged to work with today are, first class degrees, Oxford, Cambridge. And it was a Scimitar military experience where it just, again, shifted my perceptions of potential again. And I'm like, wow, this is incredible. I'd never been able to
leveling up every time, isn't it?
Yeah, and it just helps you lift your gaze and think, and because of that, I've been privileged to, it gave me the foundations to engage in other projects where I've partnered with, multiple elite performance within the trading and investing space, and I've sort of raised the capital, built the team, and delivered success across fundamental investing, wagering, and trading. And it's such an incredible domain to do it in because unlike most business, it's so objective. Mm-hmm. You can measure every decision. There's a number at the end of it.
Yeah.
And for me, it's like the best petri dish to test all this science. And you've also got some of the hardest working, smartest people to be around, which is just a handy thing.
Yeah, it's quite interesting that you've gone from that to kind of what you're doing now, I think, because I see you as like more performance. So I always think of sport when I think of performance, but actually those guys are elite in their field as well, right?
Oh, yeah.
You never sort of, you think military or sport, and military even more recently, Before then, you didn't even give them, they're athletes in their own right. Yeah. Some of those high level performing military personnel.
Yeah.
And that thing you just said then, I'm going to make a mental note of that when I do this marathon in 6 weeks. You know that when you think you're fucked, you're not actually fucked.
Yeah.
I'm going to say that to myself when I get to about 6 miles out, 10K out, where everyone says you hit the wall.
We set these limiters in our head. And marathon's the best way to smash through that. And that's why actually, like, I guess the key thing I'm thinking about there, reflecting on that, is like action. Mm-hmm. Like you can read the meme, it's great, and give you that nice feeling. You can listen to the podcast, and it's good. But like knowledge did change behavior. We'd all be millionaires, teetotal with 6 packs. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah.
We have to get out there and do it and feel it, so we can internalize those learnings ourselves. Mm-hmm. And that's where I think the physical aspect plays a huge role, right? Because doing a marathon, doing a Spartan race, it forces you. It's what I've described as a significant emotional event. Like I really enjoy your podcast. I've listened to multiple conversations, and in effect, from a psychological perspective, I hear you talking about people's significant emotional events. You're talking about you sort of. Mm-hmm. I hear you ask these questions, and then they reveal these events that shifted the trajectory of their development in terms of their
probably without even knowing. You noticed that because of your job.
100%. And what I love about the physical aspect, when you do a marathon or a high rocks or a 5K, or just get out and do 10,000 steps in the rain, is that the physical challenge is a constrained environment that forces you to deal with a hell of a lot of emotion, because there's going to be excitement, there's going to be a bit of euphoria at the end when it's finished, but there's also going to be pain. You're going to have to exercise discipline. It forces you to confront and wake up these parts of you that exist, but they're like maybe dormant day to day. So think about that when you're doing your marathon. Those skills will transfer to other areas of your life. It's not just running a marathon. It's never just going for a jog. It's never just going for a marathon. It's shaping and sculpting your brain, the physique in your mind as well as your physique, physically.
I've made a mental note of it.
Awesome.
I got you.
If there's anything today that resonates, like identify it and just act on it. Even if it's just a conversation tonight when you grab dinner with your friends or family about what are my strengths, or what does it take to win in terms of what I'm trying to achieve here, and how do I be more effective with it? Or like what things do consistently send me into redhead, and how can I get rid of some of those things in my life? Yeah. These small things can make huge differences.
Or slide into James's DM if you want to wind him up.
Yeah.
Bro, thank you very much.
Mate, thank
Appreciate
you,
your time.
Cheers, buddy.